Chapter 111, An Encounter in the Woods. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Many thanks to you, Brother Shi. The young Taoist warrior rejoiced as he heard Shi Mu's reply. He took out a few pieces of charm paper, a bottle of pale yellow magic ink, and an earth attribute spirit stone from his bosom. Then, he handed them over to Shi Mu. Shi Mu placed the stuff on his table. He then took out a magic brush, and spread out a piece of charm paper. He held the spirit stone in one hand, and started to draw charm characters with the other. The pale yellow charm characters started to appear on the paper one by one. A golden armor charm was completed within a few minutes. There was a trace of satisfaction on Shi Mu's face. The golden armor charm was the most requested magic charm in the stronghold. So, Shi Mu's success rate in these charms was astonishing even when he didn't use his unusual eyesight. He returned the remaining magic ink, paper, and spirit stone to the Taoist warrior along with the completed paper charm. Brother Shi is a prodigy when it comes to making magic charms. There are a few charm magicians in our sect who can't draw a single magic charm even after wasting a lot of materials. The Taoist warrior received the charm as he complimented in a joyous tone. Hehe, Brother Chin is overpraising me. But, I won't charge you less, no matter how much you praise me. It's the same old rule, 2 feet points for one magic charm, Shi Mu joked as he took out his token and placed it on the table. Sure. The youth fished out his own token and rubbed it twice. 2 luminous dots flew out from inside it, and submerged into Shi Mu's token. The youth expressed his gratitude and started to walk out of the room. He had barely pushed open the door when another blue-robed disciple of the Black Turtle sect walked in and said, Brother Shi, you're finally back. I want to bother you once again. Please refine a body-lifting charm for me. Shi Mu looked outside and saw 2 more disciples standing outside his door. This made him smile resignedly. Bai Yushiu still sat by the stone table in the meeting room. His exasperation grew more intense as he witnessed this. He said at once, the meeting is adjourned. Then, he turned around and walked towards his own stone room. Suddenly, a stern expression flashed in his eyes as the image of a delicate and beautiful figure floated into his mind. Humph! I consider this to be his good luck. But, he wouldn't have the same luck the next time. A primary Hotian warrior can die at any moment in this damned place. Bai Yushiu banged his hand on a wooden table in his room, and said in a wicked tone. Shi Mu completed the last requested magic charm after half an hour. He smiled as he saw the additional 20 feet points in his token. Now, he needed to endure the hardships of war, and await his return to the rear base camp of the Union. His accumulated feet points would be of great use to him then. The resources of the 7 big sects had been integrated at this base. One could exchange one's feet points for the rare materials stored therein, such as precious spirit stones, powerful magic weapons, rare herbs, and pills. It was even possible to obtain other sects' cultivation arts and martial arts techniques as long as one had enough feet points. Shi Mu closed the door, and sat down cross-legged on his bed. He then took out a small jade bottle, and poured down a bone-tempering pill in his mouth. His complexion changed after a while. His face appeared blue at some times, and white at other times. His clothes seemed to have a slight bulge, it seemed as if they were stirred up by a stream of invisible air. Shi Mu opened his eyes after a long time. He seemed to be exalted. After all, he had just made a breakthrough, and had climbed up another level in the art of breeding heavenly elephants. He had been constantly receiving orders to go on expeditions since the last 1 year. He had been wandering about in the dangerous district, and had led a hard life. However, he never showed any sign of slacking off in his practice. In fact, his potential had been stimulated in these extreme conditions of war where he had been killing unceasingly. He had reached the 4th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants with the assistance of pills. Moreover, he wasn't far from reaching the 5th stage. In addition, he had entered the middle stage of Hotian realm at one fell swoop. He had also broken through the fourth stage of the art of accumulating spirit power several months ago with the support of the moon-swallowing art. However, the speed of transforming moon energy into the crystal capsule had slowed down ever since he had stepped into the fourth stage. An entire month's effort of accumulating moonlight could only condense into a rice grain-sized crystal grain at his current speed. Moreover, it could enhance his magic power only to the smallest extent. Therefore, he hadn't experienced the euphoric sensation of making progress in his spirit power by accumulating a bean-size moonlight crystal in a long time. However, this wasn't a strange phenomenon. The higher the stage of the art of accumulating spirit power, the greater the level of difficulty in advancement to the next stage. Shi Mu had estimated that he'd have to spend at least 2 years to step into the fifth stage of the art of accumulating spirit power, even if he took the assistance of the moon-swallowing art. He sighed softly. Then, he shook his head and chuckled in a self-ridiculing manner. The old saying had turned out to be true: one never gets gratified with what one has. The man who is never content is like a snake who's trying to swallow an elephant. To reach Shi Mu's present state within a span of 2 years could be considered as an extremely fast rate of growth. Shi Mu knew that the moon-swallowing art had been supporting his practice all this time. It was unimaginably weird how he had got access to this art. However, he still wasn't satisfied with his growth. The human greed is indeed limitless, it can never be fulfilled. Shi Mu introspected. Then, his impetuous mood returned to its normal tranquil state. He closed his eyes, and started to practice. Time slid by extremely fast. Soon, it was night. The disciples in the stronghold strived vigorously throughout the day. So, they went to take rest at night, except for the ones who were put on the night shift to guard the stronghold. Shi Mu quietly pushed open his door, and tiptoed through the mine tunnel. He soon arrived at the entrance of the huge tree. The world outside the mine was pervaded with tranquility. A bright round moon hung in the night sky, it looked exceptionally bright. "Brother Shi, are you heading out again?" A disciple stood behind a boulder near the huge tree. He was on the night duty. He stuck out his head and greeted Shi Mu as he noticed him emerge from the tunnel. Shi Mu replied with a nod. Then, he advanced in the direction of the nearby woods with a light and relaxed pace. Shi Mu always stayed outside on bright moonlit nights. Almost everyone in the stronghold was aware of this. However, Shi Mu was quite tactful. Therefore, he had given a proper explanation to the other disciples regarding his strange behavior. He had told them that he had been practicing secret training that required sufficient moonlight. So, he had to go outside during moonlit nights. Surprisingly, no one ever suspected him. After all, there were various strange arts in the world that needed moonlight to be practiced. Shi Mu arrived at an open space in the woods after a quarter of an hour. This place was a few kilometers away from the stronghold. He carefully examined the surrounding area. He was relieved as he didn't find anything unusual around him. He was the sole charm magician in his stronghold. So, no one dared to risk his life and spy on him. But still, Shi Mu changed places every time he went out for his night practice to avoid any contingencies. He fished out 4 pieces of blue paper charms from his bosom. He placed them around him, and started to chant an incantation. The 4 paper charms gleamed slightly. Then, the gleam dimmed down. Shi Mu nodded in satisfaction. These 4 paper charms weren't ordinary. They were called the 4-sided magic charms. These 4 magic charms were used to make a set of 4-way sealing formula. It could detect any suspicious thing or sound that appeared within a radius of 300 meters. Shi Mu had spent more than 10,000 silvers in a low-grade fire attribute spirit stone to obtain these magic charms a few months ago. He had exchanged these charms from one of the disciples of the Wind and Fire sect. Therefore, he was always at ease while he practiced the moon-swallowing art. He sat down cross-legged after he had set up the magic formula. He then exhibited the posture of the moon-swallowing art, and entered into his dreamland. The moonlight seemed to be flooding like water in his dreamland. Shi Mu reincarnated as the white ape, and gazed at the moon with a raised head. An unending stream of moonlight essence started to enter into his eyes. The entire night passed in a flash. The sky started to get brighter and clearer. Shi Mu's body twitched as he returned from his dreamland. He felt a bean-sized crystal capsule hopping up and down in his mind. It was emitting a faint luster. Shi Mu had stopped using the crystal grain ever since he had found that it wouldn't help him as much as before. But, he continued to accumulate the moonlight essence so that the crystal grain could continue to grow bigger. He wanted to see what would happen if the crystal grain turned into something else. Shi Mu exhaled a long breath. He then got up to his feet. After that, he turned around and started to walk in the direction of his stronghold. The morning sky gradually gained brightness. Mist fluttered in the early morning wind like bands of delicate blue gauze. It looked exquisitely beautiful. Shi Mu jumped over a mound as he heard the sound of flowing water. He saw a meandering stream flowing nearby. A delighted look appeared on his face. An entire night's practice had drained away his energy. He was thirsty. He scuttled to the stream and filled his water bag with fresh water. He was about to drink it when he heard a vague sound of splashing water from the front. His complexion changed. He quickly put the water bag away, and pulled out the black blade from his waist. Then, he slowly began to move towards the source of the sound. He poked out his head from a clump of dense bushes. He finally saw the source of the sound. There was a puddle nearby. It was connected to the rivulet. There was a slender young girl in the puddle. Shi Mu saw her shimmering and bare back. It was covered in the morning mist. Her dark long hair tumbled down her back like a waterfall. Her hair drifted around her in the water like a graceful mist. The same splashing sound was produced whenever that girl moved her slender white arms in the water. The water droplets slid down her perfectly curved shoulders, and into the stream. Her jade-white skin dazzled against the background of the rising sun. Shi Mu held his breath. His body froze to the spot. He didn't know how to react. The girl turned around in the water. It revealed the soft peaks of her beautifully plump front. Suddenly, Shi Mu caught a glimpse of her face. It was Kay. Shi Mu was shocked. He couldn't bear it anymore. He moved a step backwards. Unfortunately, he stepped on a withered twig, and it made a light cracking sound. "Who's there?" Kay's charming face changed as she quickly moved her arm. Suddenly, a green vine cane darted out from the water, and rushed towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu's complexion changed. He recovered from his stiffness, and quickly stood up. He then jumped back to dodge the vine. Bang! There was a loud sound as the vine cane landed on the place where he had stood a moment ago. The powerful attack had made a deep mark on the ground. Shi Mu was surprised to see this. He realized that Kay had concealed the majority of her true strength. The green vine cane shot from the ground again. It scuttled forward like a spirit snake, and swooped over him. Shi Mu's eyebrows winkled. He quickly pulled out the blade from his waist. He then moved his arm and produced several blade shadows. These blade shadows shrouded the vine cane. Then, a red light flashed and chopped down the vine branch into a number of pieces. The vine cane didn't die even though it was cut into pieces. A black fluid gushed out from the sliced area. And the vine cane started to grow at a lightning speed. Its color turned black, and it started to emit an unpleasant fishy smell. Shi Mu was startled. He quickly pulled out his black blade, and placed it horizontally before his body. His other hand moved and fished out a fireball technique paper charm. "Oh! Brother Shi, it's you!" Shi Mu hadn't realized that Kay had gotten out of the water, and had worn her clothes. Her long black hair weren't tidied up as yet. They hung wet around her shoulder. She was surprised to see Shi Mu standing at that place. Chapter 112, A Mission in Red Characters. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Kay was extremely beautiful and elegant. She had just come out of the water, the moisture on her skin had added an unusual appeal to her heavenly gracefulness. She looked extremely charming. Sister K, it wasn't my intention to peek at you while you were bathing. The fact is that I heard a sound, and assumed that there was an enemy roaming about in the woods. So, I came here to have a look, Shi Mu replied in an embarrassed tone. I've been hiding in the stronghold for some time now, and I haven't had a bath for a long time. So, I decided to come here and take a bath before the sun came out. Kay's pretty face turned red. She hurriedly explained with a bashful expression on her face. Then, she waved her hand, and the black vine cane got buried into the ground. A thoughtful expression flashed across Shi Mu's eyes as he looked at the disappearing vine cane. He and Kay exchanged a look. They didn't speak anything for a while. The atmosphere around them had become awkward. It'll be daybreak soon. Let's hurry back. Shi Mu coughed as he returned his blade into its sheath. Then, he spoke in an attempt to break the ice. Kay blushed. But, she didn't oppose his idea. She arranged her hair, and started to walk in the direction of the stronghold with Shi Mu. The trees had a warm aura around them in the early morning. Soft and warm rays of sun beamed through the tall trees, and sprinkled a luster across the forest. A boy and a girl walked in silence in this mesmerizing atmosphere. They maintained a respectful distance between them. The youth was tall and stalwart, his arms swung like the wind. The young girl had a petite and exquisite figure. She looked timid, and had delicate facial features. Brother Shi, you're outside at this time of the day. Does it mean that you came out to practice last night? Kay's eyes blinked as she sped up to catch up with Shi Mu. She then asked. Yes, Shi Mu nodded in reply. Brother Shi is so hard-working. No wonder you're such a strong martial warrior and a proficient charm magician. It seems that this little girl will never reach such a level of proficiency. As far as I know, there's no one in the younger generation of our Tianyin sect who can be placed on par with Brother Shi. Kay's gaze softened as she spoke in a gentle tone. Sister Kay flatters me. Your wood-style magic art is quite splendid. The vine cane that you just summoned, it wasn't an ordinary magic art, right? Shi Mu asked in a casual tone. That was an ordinary wood-style magic art. It can't be compared with Brother Shi's magic skills. Oh, speaking of which, I'm running out of paper charms. So, I would like to request Brother Shi to spare some time to refine some fireball magic charms for me. I don't know if Brother Shi has some free time to spare for me. Kay changed the topic of conversation and asked. It shouldn't be an issue if Sister Kay provides me with the required material, Shi Mu answered in a promising tone. The equation between them became cordial as they chatted. Soon, they arrived at the entrance of the stronghold under the cliff near the huge tree. Crash! Suddenly, a rustling sound was heard as a man walked out of the nearby bushes. Kay was startled. But then, she noticed that it was Bai Yushiu. So, she felt relieved. Shi Mu frowned. You too. Bai Yushiu sized them up from top to bottom. His complexion darkened, he shot a fierce look at Shi Mu. Shi Mu turned his head and looked at Kay. Then, he looked at his own body. Suddenly, he was struck by a realization. Kay's wet hair was still trailing over her shoulder. Water droplets could be seen on her body, it seemed as if she had just taken a bath. Shi Mu's body also looked wet. He had stayed outside the entire night. So, his entire body was covered in dew. It seemed that he too had just come out of a bath. Both of them seemed to be in a similar condition. So, it was obvious that they were misunderstood. The same thought crossed Kay's mind. She was suddenly reminded that Shi Mu had seen her body bare. So, her face became hot and red. Bai Yushiu got extremely jealous as he saw her bashful expression. Brother Bai, is there any matter? If there's nothing, then I would like to take my leave, Shi Mu spoke in a low voice. Then, he started to walk in the direction of the huge tree. He knew that it would be futile to explain the situation to him. Moreover, he didn't wish to explain anything to him. Kay also bowed to Bai Yushiu. She then walked past him, and followed Shi Mu. Bai Yushiu gazed painfully at their receding figures. A virulent expression flashed across his eyes. Shi Mu returned to his room. He then sat down and started to ponder over the situation. Bai Yushiu had always been hostile to him. He had caused a lot of troubles for him in the past few months. However, he had never dared to overstep his limits. It was because of Shi Mu's position as the sole charm magician in the stronghold. However, a misleading incident had occurred in the morning. Bai Yushiu would have been raging with fury. Therefore, Shi Mu decided to be extra vigilant from now on. He must keep his guards on at all times. Shi Mu was accustomed to concealing most of his strength in front of the other disciples in the stronghold. Moreover, he had various kinds of magic charms up his sleeve. So, he was confident of surviving any attack or plot that Bai Yushiu might design to hurt him. Shi Mu wouldn't sit back and watch if Bai Yushiu resorted to any evil plan against him. He wouldn't be lenient. Shi Mu sat down cross-legged. He fumbled in his shirt, and took out a piece of black bone. The art of breeding a strong evil ape was recorded on it. There was a hint of regret on Shi Mu's face. He still couldn't practice this great art. Shi Mu had exchanged his feat points for a bottle of demon chi and some blood of the heavenly apes after he had reached the 4th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. He had exchanged his feat points from the base camp of the Union. Then, he had tried to practice the art of breeding a strong evil ape multiple times with the help of these things. But his accumulated real chi had turned out to be too weak to withstand the attack of the demon chi. He had planned to wait till he entered the 5th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. After that, he might be able to begin the practice of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. Shi Mu sighed and kept the bone slip aside. Then, he started to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants. According to the convention, he could rest for several days after the completion of a mission assigned by the stronghold. 2 days passed in a flash. Shi Mu continued to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants during the daytime, and the moon-swallowing art during the night. However, Bai Yushiu didn't pick a quarrel with him even once. On the 3rd day, Shi Mu returned to the tunnel relatively early in the morning after practicing the moon-swallowing art. His expression changed as soon as he entered the tunnel. A dozen or more disciples had gathered around the table. They sat silently with solemn faces. "Brother Shi, we've been waiting for you. Hurry up and sit down." The young Taoist warrior stood up and greeted him. He was the same person who had asked Shi Mu to refine a golden armor charm for him a few days back. "What happened? Why have you people gathered here?" Shi Mu asked. Suddenly, Kay smiled and pointed towards a stone stool for him to sit. Shi Mu thought for a while. Then, he walked over and sat down. An evil look flashed across Bai Yushiu's eyes. But, he didn't say anything. However, a blue vein stuck out of his neck. "Now that all of us are here, I'll come to the main point. Everyone, take a look at this first." He took a deep breath and looked away from Shi Mu and Kay. He then moved his hand and took out the white plate. Suddenly, a white light shot up from its surface, and got condensed into a layer of white light screen in the air. Then, a row of deep red characters appeared on it. Shi Mu's countenance changed as he saw this. The Union used different colors for the purpose of distributing missions to the disciples. They had set up certain standards for this purpose. Ordinary missions appeared in white color, while the special ones appeared in black. However, the exceptionally vital missions appeared in deep red characters. The other disciples were also taken aback as their eyes fell on the red text. "I've received this mission from the Union this morning. They want us to launch a sneak attack on one of the barbarian strongholds. The stronghold is 30 kilometers away from the mountain range. The barbarians store their rations and fodder there. So, we've been ordered to burn their army provisions." Bai Yushiu looked around and spoke in a grave tone. A stronghold near the mountain, where the ration and fodder are stored. Don't tell me it's the same stronghold which is in the vicinity of the Eagle Gully, a disciple of the Wind and Fire sect asked in a surprised tone. Yes, it's the same, Bai Yushiu nodded with an expressionless face. How can it be possible? I've investigated that stronghold. Its terrain is extremely dangerous. Hundreds of barbarians guard the stronghold. Moreover, several totem warriors are stationed there. I don't think that only a dozen of us can deal with them, the disciple of the Wind and Fire sect spoke in an anxious manner. The Union has sent this mission in deep red characters. So, it would obviously be highly dangerous. We have no other choice but to carry it out. Bai Yushiu shot a glance at him and said. The surrounding disciples' hearts sank as they heard these words. But, no one said anything. The disciples who dared to refuse the Union's order were given severe punishments. Even the smallest punishment included sealing one's cultivation skills. Then, that disciple was dispatched to other places to do hard labor. The toughest punishment included an order to completely erase one's cultivation skills. Then, that particular disciple was reduced to the janitor level, and was imprisoned in the sect for his or her entire life. This mission is extremely difficult. But, the feat points for the completion of this mission would be substantial 800 points at one fell swoop. And, this number would be decided on the basis of your contribution. Bai Yushiu swept his vision over the disciples as he explained. The expressions of the disciples loosened as they heard this news. Since nobody has any objection, let's move on to the concrete plan. Bai Yushiu took out a piece of paper from his bosom and spread it on the table. Then, he began to draw the topographic map of the valley on it. I once went to the Eagle Gully. That was originally a mountain stronghold of a gang of robbers. The position of their stronghold was hard to find. The robbers abandoned it and ran away after the invasion of the barbarians. Then, the barbarians took hold of it, and used it to store their rations and other materials. I remember their terrain roughly. So, I have drawn it for your reference, he said. Then, he showed the map to others. Shi Mu also took a look at it. Bai Yushiu had drawn a detailed map of the Eagle Gully. All the places around that valley had also been clearly marked on the map. Some buildings had been outlined in the bottle gourd-shaped mountain valley. It looked like a stronghold in a city. The stronghold was divided into two parts, the inner layer and the outer layer. Shi Mu looked at the map, and gazed at the disciple of the Wind and Fire sect who had been to the Eagle Gully before. He felt assured as he saw that the disciple didn't have any objection to the map. It seemed that its terrain was the major problem. As Brother Zhang just said, the people guarding the Eagle Gully are massive in numbers. They are also very strong. So, we shouldn't make a frontal attack since there are only a dozen of us, Bai Yushiu spoke with a solemn expression on his face. Has Brother Bai already thought of a brilliant plan? Kay asked in a crisp voice with a smile. Hehe, it's not a very brilliant plan. I've discussed this with some of my fellow brothers. We've taken a unanimous decision that we should divide ourselves into two groups. One group of people would feign an attack outside their stronghold, to tempt and draw the attention of the guarding people. The other team would seize this opportunity and sneak into their stronghold. Then, they would wait for an opportunity to burn down all the stuff stored inside. He smiled to Kay and explained. Everyone around the stone table sank into a deep silence as they heard the plan. Some of them wrinkled their brows, while some other revealed a thoughtful expression. This indeed wasn't a brilliant plan. But, it was fine and acceptable. Their chances of successfully completing this mission were high as long as they didn't bump into any mishap. Everyone contemplated for a while. Finally, no one opposed it. Since everyone agrees, let's discuss the allocation plan. Bai Yushiu smiled as he saw that his plan had been accepted. Chapter 113, The Eagle Gully. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. All the disciples looked at Bai Yushiu as they waited for him to present the next plan. A huge number of people aren't required to infiltrate the stronghold. That way, the objective will become extremely difficult, and we wouldn't be able to achieve the outcome of our sneak attack. I've considered this point, and reached a decision. I think 4 people will be sufficient for this task. So, let's lay out a plan. The members of the infiltration team would include me, Brother Qingjing of the Heavenly Sword Sect, Brother Ditong of the Wind and Fire Sect, and Brother Shi Mu of the Black Demon Sect. The other people will launch a coordinated feigned attack outside the enemy's camp, and will try to draw their attention. Bai Yushiu spoke with a tranquil expression on his face. Shi Mu's facial expressions changed as he heard the plan. But, they returned to their normal state in a flash. The young Taoist warrior and a tall youth with dark skin were also appointed as members of this infiltration team. They greeted Shi Mu with a slight jerk of their bodies. But, neither of them said anything. Other disciples secretly heaved a sigh of relief since they weren't selected in the infiltration team. They knew that sneaking into the stronghold would render high feat points. But, this task was much more dangerous than the task of launching a feint attack outside the enemy's camp. After all, their enemy was pretty strong. However, they were weak and very few in number. So, they would certainly die if they were captured during the infiltration process. It wasn't surprising that nobody wanted to be chosen to be a part of the infiltration team. Moreover, many people were glad to see a doubtful expression in Shi Mu's eyes. Brother Bai, the 3 of you are considered to be the most formidable martial warriors among us. But, Brother Shi is better as a magician. His martial arts skills aren't strong enough to stand in the same league as you 3. So, it seems inappropriate to include him in this dangerous infiltration task. Kay broke the silence and said. Sister Kay, I've selected Brother Shi only because of his magician status. Bai Yushiu looked at her and explained with a smile. I have a middle-level magic charm. It's a fire attribute charm. It's called the Fiery Cloud Magic Charm. The 4 of us can activate this magic charm at the right time after we've successfully sneaked in. Then, we can burn all the food and other material without any difficulty. But, this magic charm requires the pure magic power of a magician for stimulation. So, I have no other choice but to ask Brother Shi to join us in the infiltration team. Bai Yushiu fished out a red paper charm from his bosom. Some fiery red charm characters were drawn on its surface. They were exuding an undulating wave of intense magic power. Shi Mu was extremely surprised to see the red paper charm. Shi Mu had seen this middle-level magic charm for the first time. But, he had heard about its miraculous might. The task of burning down everything inside the enemy's stronghold would definitely become easier with the assistance of this charm. Kay's delicate eyebrows wrinkled. It seemed as if she was about to say something. Since Brother Bai has thoughtfully drawn up this plan, it would be my pleasure to go with him. Shi Mu waved his hand at Kay, and said with a soft chuckle. Brother Shi is indeed a righteous man. You'll be considered as a first-class warrior once this mission is completed successfully. Well, it's settled then. Everyone should start the preparations. We'll set out this afternoon, and try to get close to the Eagle Gully before dusk. We'll launch our attack during the night. Bai Yushiu casted a meaningful glance at Shi Mu and said with a fake smile. The others had no differing opinions. So, they dispersed as they heard these words. Then, they started their preparations. Shi Mu also returned to his room. He shuttled back and forth for a while, he seemed to be pondering over something. Suddenly, a sneer spread across his face. Bai Yushiu had chosen him to be a part of the infiltration team. This had revealed his true intentions. However, Shi Mu was confident that he would survive this task as long as he didn't bump into a Xian Tian warrior. Moreover, Shi Mu wouldn't show any leniency towards Bai Yushiu since he had already launched his evil plan. Knock! Suddenly, there was a knocking sound on his door. Shi Mu opened the door to find a graceful girl at his door. It was Kay. She wore a long green dress. Sister Kay, what's the matter? Shi Mu asked as he invited her into his room. Brother Shi, all this happened because of my relationship with you. It's my fault that you and Brother Bai are now on bad terms. Perhaps he wouldn't have asked you to be a part of the infiltration team if that misunderstanding hadn't cropped up a couple of days ago. Kay entered the room. Then, she spoke with an apologetic expression on her face. Hee. Sister Kay, you don't have to feel sorry, or curse yourself for anything. The Black Turtle sect has long been at loggerheads with the Black Demon sect. So, this matter has nothing to do with you. Shi Mu's eyes flickered as he replied with a gentle smile. But Sister Kay doesn't need to be worried about me. I've got means to protect myself, even if I have to sneak into the enemy's stronghold. In fact, you should be concerned about yourself. You must remain extremely cautious when you launch a feint attack outside the enemy's camp with other people. Ker wanted to say something. But she was interrupted by Shi Mu. Well, if Brother Shi says so, then. Kay's beautiful eyes darkened. She took out a green paper charm from her bosom. The charm emanated an undulating wave of green light. This light was twisting and turning like a living creature. This is a rejuvenating charm. Please carry it with you. It'll help you, she said as she handed over the paper charm to Shi Mu. Shi Mu's facial expression changed. The rejuvenating charm was just a low-level wood-style magic charm. But it was extremely difficult to make. Moreover, the cost of refining this charm was far more than other ordinary low-grade magic charms. In fact, even Shi Mu couldn't draw this magic charm. This magic charm had the ability to heal wounds quickly. Therefore, it was highly in demand. But it was a scarce thing. The level of its scarcity had increased even more during the war. This is a precious, and a life-saving magic charm. I can't accept it. Sister Kay should keep it for herself. Shi Mu shook his head, and refused to accept the charm. Brother Shi, you don't have to worry about this. I have several rejuvenating charms. Kay smiled and forced the paper charm into Shi Mu's hand. That, very well then. Here are some paper charms that would help you to defend yourself during the battle. Shi Mu felt the pleasant warmth transmitted from Kay's fingertips to his palm. This filled his heart with a warm feeling, and forced him to accept the rejuvenating charm with a brief nod. Then, he took out a few fireball and water sword charms from his bosom, and handed them over to Kay. Ker didn't hesitate. She happily received the paper charms. The two of them chatted casually for a long time. Then, Kay bid him goodbye and left. In a secret spot on the other side of the tunnel, at the same time, Bai Yushiu stood with a plump disciple of the Black Turtle sect. They seemed to be engaged in a conversation. Brother Bai, I'm a little surprised. Why would the Union issue this mission all of a sudden? I accept that our stronghold isn't that powerful. But it has been carrying out the task of scouting around the enemy's territory in an efficient manner. So, it'll pose a great loss to the Union if our stronghold gets dissolved. The plump youth knitted his brows and asked. Hee, that's something you'd have to figure out on your own. Bai Yushiu threw a smile. However, he didn't reply properly. Can it be that the Union has something big to do? Suddenly, the plump youth's eyes gleamed brightly as a thought crossed his mind. There's a piece of information that I held back from others. There was a positive point in the Union's message. They've recently found out that the barbarians have decided to destroy this area, because we've been causing them a lot of trouble. So, this stronghold is no longer safe, and should be evacuated immediately. This mission is our last mission before we evacuate this place. Bai Yushiu spoke with a sardonic smile. Oh. So, that's how it is, the plump guy seemed to have understood everything. I've been thinking of ways to deal with this guy. Shi Mu. This mission happened to come at the right time. Bai Yushiu licked his upper lip, and said in a wicked tone. Hee. Brother Bai's truly wonderful, the plump disciple smiled and said in an admiring tone. It was finally night, the bright moon hung in the sky. The cold moonlight fell through the dark curtain of the night sky, and enveloped the entire valley. A small area in the valley was crowded with buildings. Some of them were tall, while some were small in size. They were made of wood, and were situated alongside the hill. There was also a sky-soaring checkpoint in the periphery of the valley. It was approximately 20 feet high. It was built with long and thick bundles of logs. The tips of these logs had been shaped into incisive arrows. There were 2 archer towers on either side of this checkpoint. Each one of them was guarded by a tall barbarian. Both the barbarians shuttled back and forth on top of the towers in order to monitor the surrounding area. This valley was known as the Eagle Gully. It was the stronghold of the barbarian race. It fell within the boundaries of the Fu prefecture. There were no ignited torches to illuminate the valley even though it was night. This was perhaps done with an intention to maintain the secrecy of the stronghold. So, the entire valley was enveloped in darkness. But, one could hear the muffled sounds of moving feet. They seemed to be coming from behind the checkpoint's giant wooden gate. However, the situation wasn't as peaceful as it seemed to be. A dozen of shadows quietly approached the entrance to the mountain valley from the dense forest outside the valley. Their leader was a lanky youth. He waved his hand as a signal. Then, the figures around him dispersed in all directions. Each of them followed a different path, and moved silently towards the entrance of the valley with light footsteps. The lanky youth then turned around, and pulled out something from his back. He used it to reflect the moonlight in the sky. Suddenly, a burly barbarian's footsteps froze. He was shuttling on one of the 2 archer towers. He looked in the direction of the forest. He was about to shout out loud. Whiz, but then, a light sound was heard. A person's shadow whizzed out from the woods, and rushed towards the burly barbarian at an incredibly fast speed. Then, a plume-feathered long arrow passed through the barbarian's throat with terrifying accuracy. The barbarian's eyes moved around. He wanted to shout out to alert his comrades. But, he could only issue some strange muffled sounds since his throat had been sliced. His tall body turned and fell to the ground. A rain of blood spurted out of his throat like a shower and fell down the archer's tower. The complexion of the other tall barbarian changed as he saw this. However, the black shadow flashed again in the air. Then, a long arrow was again shot from the dark. Puff, the arrow pierced through the barbarian's heart, and nailed him to a wooden pole on the tower. Ah! A blood-curdling screech resounded through the darkness, and reached distant places. Another shadow flashed through the woods, and darted towards the wooden gate of the checkpoint. It was a tall youth attired in purple. Suddenly, a long hilted blade appeared in his hand as he flicked it. It was as big as a human. He waved his blade in the air, it drew a crescent moon-shaped bright blue light. Then, he heavily pounded his blade on the wooden gate with a whistling sound. Bang! A loud sound was heard. The giant wooden gate was broken into 2 parts by the dreadful strike. The giant gate tumbled down onto the ground with a loud sound. This loud crashing sound resonated across the entire valley. There was a patrolling group of 17 to 18 barbarian soldiers near the wooden gate. The series of miserable shrieks and loud crashing sound had frozen their hearts in shock. But, they pulled out their weapons as soon as their eyes fell on the enemies that stood outside the gate. They shouted as they dashed towards them. The purple-robed youth didn't show any signs of fear. Instead, he issued a loud shout. Then, he wielded his long hilted blade, and moved forward to confront the barbarians in a fearless manner. The sound of the clanging of weapons started to reverberate in the darkness. 3 or 4 barbarian soldiers were beheaded along with countless flashes of the youth's blue blade shadows. Their blood gurgled out, and filled the entire place. Attack! Suddenly, a burst of appalling shouts were heard from the forest outside the valley. The shouts seemed to be coming from a huge number of people. Suddenly, several silhouettes leapt out of the woods. They rushed in the direction of the valley. A series of arrows were shot from the woods at the same time. Each of these arrows claimed the life of a barbarian. Not a single arrow missed its target. There wasn't a single totem warrior among the patrolling troops inside the wooden gate. So, they were soon annihilated by the human warriors. However, more barbarian soldiers gushed out from the wooden buildings near the collapsed gate. Then, a fierce battle between the barbarian soldiers and human warriors was started. Dozens of torches rose and fell intermittently in some places deep into the woods. A huge bunch of people seemed to be welling up in the direction of the checkpoint's main gate. This heart-chilling scene drew the attention of all the barbarian soldiers. Their complexions changed drastically. It's not good. It looks like the human race has mounted a large-scale invasion. Suddenly, a young barbarian appeared in this chaotic situation. He seemed to be one of the barbarian leaders. He shouted as he saw the approaching torches. He then took out a black cow horn from his bosom. He raised his head, and blew it with all his might. Woo woo. Chapter 114, An Encounter with a Xian Tian Warrior. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The loud and unpleasant sound of the bugle horn resonated through the darkness. It revived the entire stronghold with a jolt. The torches were quickly illuminated at various places. Several people's shadows could be seen welling up towards the gate. What? A huge number of human soldiers emerged and attacked our stronghold? What's the present situation? There was a hefty barbarian inside a lofty building in the depth of the stronghold. He was as tall as an iron tower. He glowered at the messenger who stood in front of him. He then spoke in a sinking yet demanding tone. This place seemed to be an official meeting hall of the barbarians. Various strange patterns of beasts were carved on the surrounding walls. In addition, heads of some grotesquely shaped monsters and beasts were hung all over the walls. A huge patch of animal skin lay in the middle of the floor. A young and sturdy barbarian stood beside the tower-like barbarian. The upper part of his body was bare. He had a blue totem of a wolf's head on his chest. He had a cold and gloomy facial expression. He looked like a statue. Elder Wu, we've temporarily blocked more than 10 intruders at the entrance. But the enemy seems to be very formidable. It seems that they have more than 100 people as reinforcements in the forest. They seem to be rapidly approaching towards us. The messenger half knelt on the floor, and replied hurriedly. His entire body was covered in blood. But it was evident that it wasn't his own. So, it seems that there are several Hotian warriors among the invading human army. But how can it be possible that so many of them popped up here all of a sudden? The hefty barbarian's complexion remained dignified as he asked. Suddenly, a series of explosive sounds were heard from the direction of the entrance to the valley. The complexion of the hefty barbarian changed as he heard this loud sound. He hurriedly stepped out of the hall. Then, he saw something strange. He saw that raging flames were continuously rising towards the sky a few miles away from the entrance to the valley. Also, a thick layer of smoke was continuously soaring upwards. He couldn't figure out what exactly had happened outside. Damn! Those despicable human beings intend to incinerate the rations and fodders we have stored here. He was hugely alarmed as he understood the intention of his enemy. Tu Magu, you lead our totem warriors and rush towards the entrance to the valley. And transmit the message to our entire force that they must do everything to force the humans back. The hefty barbarian turned around and ordered the young totem warrior, the one with the wolf's head tattoo on his chest. Yes. The young barbarian immediately complied with the order. His figure flashed and transformed into a puff of smoke. Then, he rushed out of the hall and went towards a distant place. The messenger was still kneeling on the ground. The hefty barbarian then waved his hand to dismiss the messenger. He returned to the hall, and started to ponder over the situation. Then, he turned around and walked deeper into the hall. On the other side of the valley, 4 people's shadows stood side by side on another mountain peak. They were Shi Mu, Bai Yushu, and the other 2 members of their team. Our plan seems to be working. Most of the barbarians have been successfully attracted outside, towards the entrance, the Taoist youth said. The battle at the entrance to the valley had become intense by this time. The thick layers of smoke produced by the blazing flames curled up from the ground's level. The lingering sound of the never-ending battle between the two races also continued to resound. The human race was at a disadvantage since they had only had a dozen or more soldiers. But, the situation was still favorable for them as all of them were Hotian warriors. They were indisputably stronger than the ordinary barbarian soldiers. One human soldier could deal with 10 barbarian soldiers. So, there were chances that their distraction tactic might work, and they could buy a little more time for the infiltration team. There's no time to idle around. We should move into action. They won't be able to hold the barbarian soldiers for a very long time, the dark-skinned youth moved his vision and said. Shi Mu's eyes followed his vision. Then, he narrowed his eyes a little. More than 10 tall figures could be seen advancing towards the entrance to the valley. They were exceptionally tall. They seemed to be the totem warriors of the barbarian race. Let's go. Bai Yushiu's complexion darkened. He grabbed a thick rope, and jumped down the mountain peak. The other end of that rope was tied to a tree on the mountain peak. The other 3 people followed him. They also held a similar rope. They jumped down the mountain peak in the same manner. The 4 people arrived at the valley after some time. Their silhouettes flashed as they moved to a building and hid behind it. Bai Yushiu quickly scanned the surroundings. He then waved his hand to signal the other people to storm deeper into the valley. Shi Mu and other 2 disciples immediately followed his signal. This stronghold was divided into 2 layers. They had done their investigation beforehand. So, they knew that the food and fodders were stored in the internal layer of the stronghold. The majority of the barbarian soldiers had been lured out to the entrance by this time. However, it was obvious that there should be some barbarians left inside to keep guard. The 4 of them proceeded towards the internal part of the stronghold. They slaughtered the barbarians who came in their way. In fact, most of the barbarians weren't even able to see the faces of their enemies before they got killed. Shi Mu and his team members didn't take much time to sneak into the internal layer of the stronghold. Such a huge amount of rations and fodders are stored here. Shi Mu and his team members entered the internal layer, and examined their surroundings. Suddenly, a trace of amazement crawled across their faces. Several dozens of cylindrical-shaped wooden buildings loomed in the internal layer of the stronghold. Each one of them was stuffed with grains, weapons, and armor. There were sufficient armors to annihilate an entire city. A few dozen tents were set up outside these buildings in order to help store the surplus army provisions and supplies. These army provisions are sufficient to support several thousand soldiers. Is it possible that all the resources needed to support the barbarian soldiers stationed in the Fu prefecture are kept here? The young Taoist warrior exhaled a breath, and pondered in a soft voice. These 4 people were hidden in an open area behind a building. Shi Mu observed his surroundings, and felt that something wasn't right. He was disturbed by the fact that the internal layer of the stronghold wasn't under heavy security. There wasn't a single patrol group near the storehouses that stored the barbarian race's army provisions. Could it be that the battle at the gate had drawn all the guards outside? Let's begin our mission. We should quickly incinerate these provisions. Only then we'll be able to return with great feat points, the dark-skinned youth of the Wind and Fire sect exclaimed cheerfully. Haha! I never thought that this task would be so easy. It seems that I can get a new sword after I return from here, the young Taoist youth chimed in. His eyes also flashed with a hint of excitement. All right, let's begin. Bai Yushiu pondered for a while. He then quickly observed the surroundings and nodded in agreement. Shi Mu didn't say anything. He didn't know why, but he had a premonition of an approaching danger. He felt a strange feeling of lingering heaviness in the air. Then, let's act according to our plan. Brother Shi would sneak in and activate the fiery cloud charm. And, the 3 of us will coordinate from the sidelines. We must burn down all the provisions. Bai Yushiu's eyes flickered. He then took out the charm from his bosom and extended it towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu was about to stretch out his hand to hold it. But then, something happened that took away his breath. He was stricken by panic, and jumped backwards. Whiz! Suddenly, a dark shadow flashed past him from behind. It snatched the fiery cloud charm from Bai Yushiu's hand, and disappeared into the darkness like a bolt of lightning. Bai Yushiu issued a heart-rending cry, and jumped back. His right hand was drenched in blood, 2 of his fingers had disappeared. Shi Mu was shocked. He stomped on the ground and jumped to one side. He then pulled out his black blade, and placed it horizontally before his body. The Taoist youth and the dark-skinned disciple had also grabbed their weapons. They seemed prepared to confront any critical situation. "Who's there?" Bai Yushiu struggled to suppress the pain of his severed fingers, and shouted loudly. They're a bunch of useless people. 500 elite soldiers and 20 totem warriors were assigned to guard this place. But, they still let you 4 dirty mice slip inside." Suddenly, a cold voice resounded in the darkness. Then, a black-robed man walked over and stood in front of them. There was a solemn expression on his beardless face. He wasn't as tall as an average barbarian, but he was still 9 feet in height. He wore a dark black cloak, it was adorned with crow feathers. The black color of the feathers was glowing under the bright moonlight. One could have mistaken him for a tall human if it wasn't for his strange pale yellow hair. A tower-like tall barbarian man stood beside the black-cloaked barbarian. He looked extremely petrifying and wretched. The black-robed man appeared so short in comparison to this tall one that it seemed as if he had been shrunken. Hiss! Suddenly, a hissing sound resounded. Shi Mu and the others were examining the 2 barbarians when they heard the hissing sound. Then, they saw a huge snake head appear from behind the black-robed man. The snake head was as big as a large bowl. Its entire body was covered with black and grey striped pattern. It swayed and wrapped itself around the black-robed man's body. The snake seemed to be several feet long. The snake's eyes flashed with a cold ominous glint. It held the fiery cloud charm in its mouth. There was also a faint sign of blood on its mouth. The black-robed man stood there for a while. It put a huge pressure on Shi Mu and his teammates. This overwhelming feeling filled their hearts with strange heaviness, and they started to gasp for breath. "A Xian Tian warrior!" Shi Mu was dumbstruck. Bai Yushiu and the other 2 youths also sensed the enormous strength of the man. Their faces turned pale with fear. The fiery cloud charm, tisk, tisk. The old fools of the human race have been very generous this time. They have bestowed a middle-level charm on you people, the black-robed barbarian clicked his tongue and said with a sigh. Suddenly, a bright red blazing fireball appeared in front of him. It was shot towards the paper charm that he held in his hand. It hadn't reached his hand yet, but the man still felt as if a scorching heat wave had hit him across his face. Bai Yushiu and the other 2 people were taken aback. They noticed that this fireball was shot by Shi Mu. They hadn't noticed that Shi Mu held 4 or 5 red paper charms in his hand. He moved his hands. Then, 4 or 5 fireballs emerged once again with a flash of light. However, Shi Mu had aimed these fireballs at their storehouses this time. Shi Mu turned around as soon as the fireballs were shot. Then, he immediately dashed towards a distant place. Bai Yushiu and the other disciples couldn't respond to this series of lightning-fast actions. Shi Mu had rushed several feet away before they could take any action. The black-robed man grunted, and hid the paper charm behind his body. Then, a pale blue radiance appeared on the surface of his body. He thrust his fist forward before anyone could understand anything. The fiery cloud charm was a middle-level charm. So, it could detonate the moment it received the slightest bit of magic power of the fire element. Then, it would unleash a terrible force of energy. It wasn't a joke to be affected by a middle-level charm from such a short distance. It could even hurt a Xian Tian level warrior if he fell within its explosion's radius. Boom! A dark blue fist wind rolled out and collided with the red fireball. The red fireball was repelled with a flash of blue light. It turned into a puff of remnant flame, and dispersed in the air. This delay gave ample time to Bai Yushiu and other two disciples to react. They were jolted out of their trance. Then, they turned around and fled towards a distant place. A trace of ominous glint flashed across the black-robed man's eyes as he saw this. He decided to follow them. Suddenly, there was a series of loud rumbling sounds. The fireballs that Shi Mu had released fell on the surrounding storehouses in succession. The destructive force of the accumulated magic power of these fireballs accelerated the intensity of the fire. So, they instantly set several surrounding storehouses on fire. Most of these buildings contained combustible material. So, the blazing fire could spread at an alarming speed if it wasn't immediately controlled. The black-robed man's complexion turned gloomy. The pale blue light around his body regained its brightness. He shot his hands, and produced blue shadows. 40 to 50 feet high blue shadows appeared around his palms. Then, he swept them toward the raging flames. The black-robed man had just displayed an ice element cultivation art. It could easily douse the fire. His palm shadows got transformed into a group of round blue fog as soon as they fell. They reduced the heat to a great extent. Therefore, most of the flames were put out in a short while. The black snake around the man's body also seemed to be quite intelligent. It swooped down on one of the burning storehouses, and swept his tail to extinguish the fire. "Call our men to put off the fire. I'll take care of those young boys." The black-robed man's complexion turned ashen. He commanded the tower-like tall barbarian man. He then rose from the ground and took off after Shi Mu and his companions like a fierce eagle. Chapter 115, Battle with the Black Snake. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The huge black snake twisted its body. Then, it shot forward like a black arrow, and followed after the black-robed man at an alarming speed. Shi Mu ran towards the entrance to the valley, as fast as he could. His entire body was covered with a faint layer of blue light. It was because of the body-lifting charm that he had chosen to use at this critical point. He had become extremely fast under the effect of the body-lifting charm. In fact, he left a string of black after-images as he shuttled through the buildings. Bai Yushiu and the other people were dozens of feet behind him. Moreover, they weren't as fast as Shi Mu. So, the gap between them continued to grow. The expression on Shi Mu's face didn't loosen even a little. He felt that he was being chased by a violently surging murderous aura at a very high speed. He felt a little agitated. He regretted that he hadn't prepared a few more fireball paper charms beforehand. He could have used them to delay the black-cloaked man a little more, and all of them would have been able to escape together. The barbarian soldiers realized that these four people were trying to escape, and tried to stop them. But, these ordinary barbarian soldiers couldn't touch even their shadows. Whiz! Suddenly, a black silhouette leapt from the internal layer of the stronghold. It took a quick turn in air, and landed on the ground. It was Shi Mu. A meaningful look flashed across his eyes as he looked towards the left. He noticed that the cliff was just a short distance away from where he stood. The four of them had crossed the mountains to reach the same cliff. Their ropes were still supposed to be there. He could easily climb up the mountain peak if he seized this opportunity. Then, he could safely escape from the valley. This thought flashed through his mind like an electric current. Then, his body moved into action. But, he didn't rush towards the cliff to his left side. Instead, he dashed towards the entrance to the valley. A series of ear-piercing sounds rang out after a couple of seconds. Three-person silhouette also rushed out from the internal layer of the stronghold. They were Bai Yushiu and the other two members of the team. The Taoist youth and the dark-skinned youth had an anxious expression on their faces. They looked pale with fear. They didn't think much, and directly dashed towards the edge of the cliff. However, Bai Yushiu's eyes flashed with a thoughtful look. A gleam of hesitation appeared in his eyes. But, he still followed the other two members of the team. He rushed towards the cliff in an attempt to take advantage of the ropes. A person's figure arrived at the same spot with a gust of wind after a short while. It was the black-cloaked barbarian man. "Oh, they have chosen different paths to escape," the man spoke in a surprised tone. Then, he looked towards the entrance to the mountain valley. After that, his gaze turned in the direction of the cliff. "Go, the person over there will become a delicious supper for you." The man thought of something. Then, he pointed his finger towards the entrance to the valley. Whiz! The black snake followed his order, and whizzed past him. It dashed towards the entrance to the valley. The black-robed man's face revealed a sneer. This black snake was an ancient psychic beast. He had captured it in his homeland. It was raised according to an ancient barbarian method. It had an extremely sensitive sense of smell. Its astonishing strength couldn't be underestimated either. It wasn't as powerful as a Xian level powerhouse. However, it could be placed on par with a Hotian warrior of the advanced stage. These four people had dared to play tricks on him. How could he allow these human kids to slip away like this? The black-robed man's silhouette moved as this thought crossed his mind. Then, he started to chase after Bai Yushiu and the others at an incredibly fast speed. At the mountain valley entrance, the tactical scenario made for a lopsided situation as more and more totem warriors started to participate in the battle. The disciples who had been feigning the attack had been compelled to withdraw. The barbarian soldiers had seized this chance to besiege the human disciples. As a result, the human warriors had been isolated from each other. Then, more and more casualties started to take place. Kay held a long jasper wand in her hand as she stood in the dense woods outside the valley. Dozens of vine canes emerged from the ground as she mumbled something. Each of these canes had a torch clung onto it. They swayed and advanced towards the entrance to the valley. However, Kay's complexion looked pale. She had summoned several vine canes at the same time. So, it had consumed a significant amount of her magic power. A few beads of sweat shimmered on the tip of her nose. Suddenly, a person's shadow flashed from outside the woods, and landed near Kay. It was the same girl from the Tianyin sect who shared a good relationship with Kay. "Hurry up! Let's withdraw! Time's almost up." The girl had a cold and inscrutable expression on her face. She spoke in a sinking voice. Kay's expression changed. A trace of hesitation glinted in her eyes as she looked in the direction of the mountain valley. She had seen an indistinct trace of a red light flicker in that direction. But, it had faded away after being visible for only a couple of seconds. "The barbarian people are showing up in large numbers. It will be too late to even regret if we don't retreat right now," the other girl urged. Kay nodded as she heard this. Then, she waved her jasper wand. Suddenly, the swaying and dancing vine canes got submerged into the ground. Then, they disappeared from sight. Kay's body staggered. Her complexion turned as pale as a paper. The other girl's eyebrows wrinkled as she saw this. She hastily walked up to her, and supported her with her hand. Then, both the girls rushed towards the distant place. 7 or 8 human disciples were also fleeing in all directions behind them. They were in the vicinity of the entrance to the valley. Few of them were relatively slower. So, they couldn't escape and were besieged by the barbarian and totem warriors. Then, they were killed by them. Several totem warriors finally realized that the number of their enemies was just a dozen or more. The troops in the dense woods were nothing but a camouflage set up by their enemy to deceive them. This realization filled them with rage. They started to blaze with anger. They roared and cursed as they chased after the remaining human disciples. The ordinary barbarian soldiers in the valley also sensed this clever trick. So, they started to brandish their weapons in a crazy manner. They wanted to chase down every single one of the human warriors. But then, a middle-aged barbarian appeared before them. He looked like their leader. He shouted at the top of his voice to stop them, the enemy has been vanquished. Leave the rest to our totem warriors. The remaining people should return to the mountain valley and calculate our losses." The middle-aged man looked in the direction of the mountain valley. Then, he rushed and led his remaining team towards it. Suddenly, a young barbarian soldier with a short stature appeared in their line of sight. He was clad in an animal skin. He was coming from the direction in which the barbarian soldiers were heading. He flashed past the middle-aged man in an instant. He then cut through the crowd, and made his way outside the valley. "You stop right there! Which team do you belong to? Didn't you hear my orders?" The middle-aged barbarian leader's complexion darkened. He shouted out with all his might. The young barbarian acted as if he hadn't heard anything. He didn't even slow down. Instead, he continued to move away from the crowd. "It doesn't seem right. You're certainly a human." The middle-aged man's countenance changed. He shouted out again. His hand moved, and grabbed the long-hilted blade from his waist. The young barbarian also waved his arm. Suddenly, a streak of black light fled from his hand, and got submerged into the throat of the middle-aged barbarian like a bolt of lightning. Fresh blood started to gush out of his throat. The middle-aged barbarian tried hard to pull out his long blade. But, he fell to the ground before he could succeed. The young barbarian quickened his pace once again. Then, he stepped out of the valley with a few quick movements. After that, his figure disappeared into the dense woods. Suddenly, the surrounding barbarian soldiers regained their senses. A few young barbarian leaders shouted angrily to command the team. Then, dozens of soldiers dashed towards the dense woods to track down the youth. But, they didn't find any sign of him on entering the woods. In fact, even the sound of his footsteps had faded away. The team leaders were embarrassed. They stood motionless, and looked at each other in dismay. Suddenly, some of the barbarians felt that something had flashed. Then, a long black shadow whizzed past them, and vanished into the woods. The barbarians were stupefied. They gazed at the woods, but couldn't see any shadow. There wasn't even a single suspicious sound. The youth who had disguised himself as a barbarian, and had escaped out of the valley was none other than Shi Mu. He was quite tall. Moreover, his skin was bronze in color. So, he resembled a common barbarian man after he wore an animal skin. He continued to run extremely fast in the forest. He finally came to a halt after he had covered several kilometers. He exhaled a long breath. Then, he turned around and looked in the direction of the valley. His heart was still gripped by a lingering fear. He had expected that he would bump into a Xian-Tian-level barbarian at this place. He was well aware of the terrifying strength of a Xian-Tian warrior. He knew that he couldn't withstand such an inexplicable strength at his present level. He continued to look in that direction for a while. He then turned his head, and decided that he shouldn't linger there any longer. He turned around. He was about to take a step when a gust of wind attacked him from his right side. A black shadow had darted out of the forest, and had aimed at his neck. It was the black snake that the black-cloaked man had sent. Shi Mu's heart stopped beating for a second. He hurriedly moved aside, and evaded the attack at a lightning speed. He raised his arm at the same time, and shot a punch horizontally. Bang! Shi Mu's punch hit the lower jaw of the snake. The snake was struck hard by this blow. Its body twisted, and crashed onto the ground. But then, it turned abruptly, as if it wanted to devour Shi Mu's hand. Shi Mu was left dumbfounded as he saw this. Shi Mu had realized that the snake's scales were extremely tenacious when he had punched it. Moreover, he had displayed the stone-breaking fist that had reached its consummate stage. But still, it had failed to produce any effect on the snake. Suddenly, an idea flashed across his mind like an electric current. He stomped on the ground. The blue light on his body sparked, and he flew 3 meters backwards like a fallen leaf. As a result, he managed to evade the snake's bite once again. Fortunately, the body-lifting charm was still effective. so, he was able to move as fast as the snake. The huge snake's fierce eyes glared with an ominous glint since it had missed its target twice. It issued a couple of hissing sounds to reveal its agitation. After that, it stopped its offensive attack temporarily. Shi Mu's complexion became dignified. Shua! He pulled out the black blade from his back, and held it upright in front of him. Then, both of them stared coldly into each other's eyes. Shi Mu was fretful in his heart even though there was a composed expression on his face. He was frequently looking in the direction of the valley from the corner of his eye. He thought that it was possible that the black-cloaked man could pursue the snake and arrive there at any moment. Fortunately, his fear didn't come true. He felt nothing unusual approaching from the direction of the valley. This snake seemed to be chasing him alone. Shi Mu heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that the black-cloaked man had chosen the other way, and had gone after Bai Yushiu and the others. Luck seemed to be in Shi Mu's favor this time. The black snake became impatient while Shi Mu was lost in thoughts. Its coarse body looking like a withered tree trunk sprang up from the ground. Then, it pounced on its target at an extremely fast speed like an arrow. The snake's head trembled, and it produced a few shadows of its head. It did this so that Shi Mu couldn't identify its real head. However, Shi Mu remained motionless. Suddenly, a trace of golden light flashed in his eyes. Then, he issued a loud shout as his blade attacked one of the shadows of the snake's head. Ping! A dull thumping sound was heard as the snake was thrown upside down several feet away. It rolled on the ground for a while. However, it still managed to raise its head. The scales on the snake's neck had been shattered into pieces. A wound could also be seen on its neck. Fresh blood gushed out from it. The snake's eyes revealed a hazy look. It shook its head to get hold of itself. It had apparently received a severe jolt in its head. So, it started to feel dizzy, and eventually lost its consciousness. Shi Mu's eyes revealed an unbelievable look. He was extremely sure of the sharpness of his blade. But, his all-out strike had only caused a concussion and a little damage to the snake's scales. The snake's body was indeed hard. Shi Mu felt a little surprised. However, he didn't stop. He seized this opportunity since the snake seemed to be a little delirious. And, he hurriedly dashed towards it. Meanwhile, the charm characters carved on the surface of his black blade lit up. Then, a layer of bright flame emerged on its surface. Suddenly, the blade flashed and shot out 13 red blade shadows towards the snake. The snake had regained its consciousness by now. It tried to move aside. But, it didn't get enough time to dodge the attack. It twisted its body in desperation, and moved backwards. Its huge tail swung in the air, and plummeted down heavily on the red blade shadows. Ping! Another dull thumping sound resounded. The red blade shadows were rooted and dispersed. But, the snake was also sent flying into the air. Then, it heavily bumped against a big tree several meters away. Chapter 116, The Chase Down. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Several black scars appeared on the snake's tail. In addition, its scales were shattered into pieces at many places. However, the burning pain seemed to have further stimulated the ominous character of the snake. It issued a hissing sound as its body rolled around the trunk of the tree a number of times. It could launch a counterattack on Shi Mu at any moment. Suddenly, a green beam of light flashed on the ground near the huge tree. Then, several thick vine canes drilled out of the earth like lightning and shot towards the snake. They tightly coiled around the snake's body, and bundled it on the spot. The snake's eyes revealed the trace of a frightened expression like a human. It started to struggle to break free. Several vine canes were snapped off because of the huge effort it put into its struggle. In fact, it seemed that the remaining vine canes wouldn't hold the snake much longer. "Brother Shi, do it now!" A crisp and tender voice was heard from the nearby woods. It was Kay's voice. Shi Mu sprang up, and arrived in front of the black snake in a flash. Then, he wielded his sword. Suddenly, his burning blade became hazy, and transformed into 13 red blade shadows. Swish! Shi Mu issued a low shout as the 13 red blade shadows gathered together and transformed into one incomparably thick streak of red light. Then, it started to hack the vital part of the snake's body like a lightning bolt. Kaka! The huge tree was chopped down into 2 halves from the middle. It was the same tree that the black snake had wound itself around. Then, the tree fell to the ground. There was a black burn mark on the place from where it was sliced off. The body of the snake was also chopped into 2 pieces. It also tumbled down onto the ground. Each half of its body twisted and wriggled on the ground in a crazy manner. It continued to shudder vehemently for some time. Then, it became motionless. Shi Mu exhaled a long breath. This snake's body was unreasonably tenacious. Moreover, it was incredibly fast. Fortunately, Shi Mu had imbued the black blade with a fire attribute magic formula to restrain such powerful enemies. In addition, Kay had showed up at the right time to support him. Otherwise, he would have had to make arduous efforts to defeat this snake. Snap! A soft sound was heard. Suddenly, the fire attribute spirit stone embedded on Shi Mu's blade broke into pieces. Shi Mu wrinkled his eyebrows, and let out a gentle sigh. He had forcefully increased the might of his last strike. It seemed that the energy of the spirit stone had got exhausted due to this. Shi Mu didn't have a fire attribute spirit stone at this moment to replenish his blade. But, he had defeated a fierce enemy. He slipped the black blade into its sheath. Then, he looked towards the dense forest nearby. 2 slender figures walked out of the forest. They were Ker and the inscrutable girl of the Tianyin sect. Sister K, many thanks to you for your precious assistance, Shi Mu clasped his hands across his chest and said. Then, he greeted the girl of Tianyin sect with a brief nod. Brother Shi, I knew that you'll return safe and sound. Well, what about the army provisions stored in their stronghold? Kay's complexion looked pale. But, she spoke with an expression of delight. Don't ask if we burnt the army provisions or not. We could have never thought that there would be a Xian level barbarian warrior guarding that place. We had no time to think about our mission. We were in a hurry to run away as fast as possible. Shi Mu forced a smile and said. A Xian warrior. Kay and the other girl's complexion changed. Perhaps, we had received incorrect information from the Union. This black snake was that Xian warrior's pet, Shi Mu sighed softly and said. What happened to the other people? Are they all ready? Kay was startled. We ran away in separate directions when we noticed that the person was a little distracted. I don't know if anyone else was able to escape. But, I'm afraid that there is little chance of their survival, Shi Mu shook his head and replied. Kay's complexion darkened as she heard these words. We must immediately leave if this black snake was the pet beast of that barbarian, the other girl said hastily. Sister Chi, is there any danger? Kay was taken aback. Shi Mu was also startled by her words. He looked at the girl. I've heard from my mentor about the wicked methods the barbarians use to raise their pet beasts. There's supposed to be a connection between the beast and their owners. So, if the pet beast dies, its owner knows about it, even if he's hundreds of kilometers away. So, I presume that he may arrive here at any moment, the girl explained in a sinking voice. Then, what are we waiting for? Let's leave right now. Kay's face turned pale. The girl surnamed Chi naturally didn't have any objections to this. The 3 people were about to leave the place when an intense murderous aura burst from the forest towards them. Shi Mu turned around extremely fast like lightning. Shua! He drew out his blade, and put it in front of his chest. Kay and the other girl also prepared to face the critical situation. Kay raised her magic wand, and the other girl drew out a thin sword. A silhouette flashed, and a black figure appeared in front of the 3 disciples. The black-robed man held a blue thing in his hand. It was as big as a person's head. Shi Mu's heart skipped a beat as he looked at that thing. The thing he held in his hand was Bai Yushiu's head. His head had been frozen by blue ice crystals. But, his face had retained the terrified and reluctant look that he must have had before his death. His eyes were still wide open, but they appeared expressionless. The complexion of the two girls turned ghastly pale as they saw the head. The black-robed man looked at the ground, and saw that his pet snake had been cut into 2 pieces. His complexion changed. A trace of agony appeared on his face as he noticed that it wasn't moving. His fingers exerted a huge pressure on the head that he held in his hand. Ping! A loud sound was heard. Bai Yushiu's head and the blue ice crystals crumbled into pieces and got scattered on the ground. Well, I don't think that I could be wrong here. It seems that you're the one who has killed my pet. Now, you'll be buried with it. The man looked at Shi Mu and said in a cold voice. Shi Mu felt as if he was being looked at by a venomous snake. This feeling sent a shiver down his spine. So, he started to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants to its maximum limit in order to stabilize his mind. This worked and eased his discomfort to an extent. Then, he spoke to the 2 girls in a low voice, "Hurry up, and run away separately in 2 different directions." Kay hesitated. But, the girl surnamed Chi grabbed her arm, and rushed towards the area that lay behind them. "Don't dream on! Are you people still thinking of escaping at this critical moment? You people, do me a favor and pay tribute to my pet with your life." The man laughed grimly. Then, a layer of dark blue light appeared on his body. He waved his palm, and a huge amount of Xian Tian level real Qi condensed around it. It formed a 10 feet long blue palm in a flash. The black-robed man pounded it towards the 3 of them. Suddenly, the air around the 3 of them became extremely viscous. A mountain-like formidable force gushed towards them from all sides, and wrapped them inside it. Shi Mu felt his whole body's qi and blood surging up violently. It seemed as if they were about to flow back towards his heart. He felt that the strength of his qi wasn't enough to withstand this terrific force. His body felt like a quivering paper under the effect of this strong force. Shi Mu was thunderstruck by this sudden attack. He desperately stimulated the real qi within his body to the highest point. His body expanded as his magic power and real qi surged up violently. Then, he infused his magic power into his black blade. Bang! A raging flame emerged on the surface of his black blade with an explosive sound. It was nearly 1 foot high. Shi Mu opened his eyes wide, and shouted with all his might. He flicked his blade at the same time. A bright blazing flame darted out to welcome the approaching gigantic palm in the air. A loud rumble was heard. Shi Mu spouted out a mouthful of blood as the raging flame on the black blade dissipated. His body was sent flying upside down several feet away. However, Shi Mu quickly recovered his balance by taking advantage of the countervailing force. Shi Mu had managed to survive the powerful strike. But, Kay and the girl surnamed Chi weren't that lucky. They couldn't protect themselves, and were severely struck by the blue gigantic palm. They flew and crashed on the ground dozens of feet away, and lost their consciousness. It was hard to figure whether they were alive or not. The corners of Shi Mu's eyes twitched in pain as he saw this. But, his body didn't budge. "You've got some talent there. You were able to withstand my strike. It is very admirable." The black-robed man was amazed. He then sneered, and fired his second attack. Shi Mu gritted his teeth as a fierce look flashed across his eyes. Suddenly, he touched his back, and threw something in the air. A silver light shot up into the air, and rushed towards the blue palm. Shi Mu turned around and rolled into the nearby woods. The man wrinkled his eyebrows in anger as he saw Shi Mu's movement. The silver light Shi Mu had just shot collided with his blue palm head-on. Bang! An explosive sound was heard. The silver light turned into a group of dazzling rays of purple light. Then, it exploded like a small burning sun. A hot wave of scorching flames surged out, and engulfed the blue palm light. The huge force that heat wave carried proliferated in the surrounding area. This compelled the black-robed man to go a step backwards. The man found one of his arms slightly burnt. The might of the silver light's explosion could be compared with a powerful strike of a Xian Tian warrior. The black-robed man was shocked and angry at the same time. He shouted, "You're courting death." He then took out a pair of blue gloves with a flash of red light, and exploded his fist forward. He shot his fist shadow towards Shi Mu in such a forceful manner that it seemed like a solid fist. It was so quick that Shi Mu hardly had time to defend himself. Shi Mu's countenance changed. It was too late for him to respond. But, he still managed to put his black blade in front of his chest to block the attack. The blue fist shadow plummeted down on his body heavily. Shi Mu felt as if his body was struck by a thunderbolt. He was sent flying upside down like a worn-out sack. He finally fell on the ground after bumping against several big trees. He spouted out a mouthful of blood again. He realized that several of his bones had been crushed. He might have been dead by now if he wasn't physically strong. However, the muscles and bone of his entire body seemed to be shattered into pieces. He hadn't died, but he could hardly move. A person's silhouette flashed, and the black-robed man appeared before him. A vicious look flashed across his eyes as he raised his fist once again. Shi Mu smiled bitterly, and closed his eyes. Suddenly, an ear-piercing sound resounded in all directions. The black-robed man felt that something was flashing above his head. Suddenly, an ice crystal flower appeared above the man's head. It started to revolve around his head rapidly. The man was shocked. He hit his foot on the ground, and his body swept several feet away like a startled big bird. "Who's hiding there?" The man looked around, and shouted in a stern voice. However, he didn't get any reply. The white light continued to glisten in the air. Then, a blossoming ice crystal emerged again, and darted towards the black-cloaked men like an arrow. The man's complexion dignified. His body started to exude a layer of blue light, it was even brighter than before. He then shook his arm, and a group of dark blue palm shadows fled and collided with the ice crystal. Bang! A loud sound was heard. Two groups of light balls bumped into each other with a loud rumble. Suddenly, an icy cold wind erupted in the air, and shrouded the surrounding trees with a layer of frost. The man gave a muffled snort. He seemed to be at a disadvantage. He reluctantly drew a step backwards. Shi Mu's body shivered as he saw the ice crystals in the air. A strong emotion bubbled up in his heart like a tidal wave. He suppressed the excruciating pain in his body, and struggled to raise his head. A young girl slowly walked out of the forest with a thunderous sound. She was barefoot, and was clad in a white dress. These features contributed to her exquisite beauty, and made her look like a fairy. Her beautiful eyes glanced around. She held a short jade ruler in her slender white hand. A faint trace of white mist floated around her body. Shi Mu's facial expression froze. He glued his eyes on the white-clad girl. He just couldn't look away from her. Chapter 117, The Xian Tian Level Battle. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu had met this girl once before. She was the demon witch of Tianyin sect whom Shi Mu had been yearning for all these years. This fairy-like gorgeous maiden had similarly dropped from the sky not so long ago. She had appeared before Shi Mu's eyes like an unworldly dream once before as well. The mysterious ice ruler. It can't be real. It must be an imitation. The complexion of the black-cloaked man changed as his eyes fell on the jade ruler in the girl's hand. He shook his head and spoke in disbelief. "If I'm not wrong, then you're Zhong Yuan of the Cold Moon tribe of the barbarian race." The demon witch looked at him, and asked with a faint smile. "That's right. I'm Zhong Yuan. Anyways, who are you? You're holding a fake ruler. But, you still dared to stop in front of me, to invite your death," he said in a stern voice. The girl cracked into a soft chuckle. She didn't intend to answer him. Shi Mu lay nearby. She didn't look towards him either. Instead, she gave her hand a gentle wave. Suddenly, a group of white mist drifted towards them from the woods. It then carried away the body of that white-robed girl surnamed Chi. "Is this the man who's responsible for your condition?" the beautiful maiden asked in a casual manner. The corners of Miss Qi's mouth were smudged with blood, and her face was deathly pale. She seemed to be unconscious. "That's right," Zhong Yuan admitted. "He he. Very well then. You'll repay it with your life in that case," the charming beauty giggled in a delightful manner. Suddenly, her face became expressionless. Now, there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile on her face. An intense murderous aura pervaded and filled the surrounding atmosphere. Suddenly, she twisted her wrist. The white radiance of the ice ruler in her hand grew brighter, and an overwhelming coldness filled the air. Chi! Chi! A series of air-piercing sounds was heard. Then, dozens of ice spears appeared and darted towards Zhong Yuan. They arrived in front of him in a blink of an eye. A contemptuous smile crawled across Zhong Yuan's face. He lifted his hand and struck at the ice spears with his palm. His glove exuded a stronger blue radiance as a 10 feet huge gigantic blue palm appeared in the air. His blue palm then grabbed several ice spears, and crushed them into pieces. However, an ear-piercing sound rang out before he could launch a counter-strike. It was accompanied by another round of ice spears which bombarded towards him with a shrill sound. The ice ruler in the beautiful girl's hand twinkled a few times as a huge number of ice spears continued to emerge one after another. However, Zhong Yuan continued to pound his fist and feet. Therefore, all the icicles were smashed into pieces. Several rounds of such attacks continued to take place. The series of attacks didn't provide the black-robed man even a moment to gasp for breath. However, these attacks were unable to cause even the slightest injury to him. I might have been afraid if you were holding the real mysterious ice ruler. But, you can't harm me since it's merely an imitation, Zhong Yuan spoke with an impatient look on his face. Another round of ice spears bombardment, and they too were rooted by him. Suddenly, he noticed that the ice ruler had started to hover above the demon witch's head. He hadn't noticed when the ice ruler had left her hand and had started to float in the air. The demon witch bent and stretched her fingers. She then formed a strange magic gesture. "Ice soul, begin!" A loud crashing sound was heard. Zhong Yuan had crushed numerous ice spears by now. Suddenly, those smashed fragments turned into a vast stretched layer of white mist. This mist shrouded the black-robed man, and trapped him inside. It seemed as if the mist had gained its own intelligence. It then formed a white ball of mist. The man's complexion turned pale. He stomped on the ground in an attempt to jump backwards. However, the layers of white mist were attached to him like living creatures. They continued to engulf him, no matter how hard he tried to break free. They didn't leave any gap for him to escape. All the attacks of that man had ended up being futile. They couldn't bring the slightest damage to the mist ball. Instead, his attacks went through them. Real Qi is transformed into spirits? How can it be possible? Zhong Yuan shouted in bewilderment. Ice Soul Prison. The demon witch didn't pay any attention to his words. Her hands continued to change postures for a while. Then, she clasped her hands together. Kaka. Suddenly, the white mist surrounding the man solidified with a loud crackling sound. They changed into a white crystal, and took the shape of dozens of feet wide ice ball. Now, the black-cloaked man was sealed inside that huge ball. The man continued to struggle with his limbs to unshackle himself. However, he seemed like a trivial fly trapped in embers. He couldn't even budge. The demon witch's complexion finally loosened a bit. Several sparkling beads of sweat were gleaming on the elegant wings of her nose. This secret art seemed to have consumed a huge amount of her energy. Shi Mu had been lying motionless on the ground all this time. However, he had witnessed this splendid battle without batting an eyelid. He was hardly able to close his mouth. He was gripped by a sense of mixed feelings. His current level of cultivation wasn't high. So, most of the processes in this battle had been incomprehensible to him. But he had gained a clear impression of the intensity of fights between Xian level warriors. This experience would definitely benefit him in his future training. His eyes were glued to the graceful figure of the white-clad beauty. He couldn't take his eyes off her, not even for a second. The oath he had made several years ago was still reverberating in his heart. He didn't seem to have the slightest intention of wavering from it. When he had met this gorgeous girl for the first time, she had appeared a fairy-like maiden to him. He had felt as if she had descended from the heavens. However, he was just an ordinary human being back then. The distance between these two people was huge and insurmountable. This was their second encounter. This girl still held a high place in his heart. However, he was no longer the same person. He no longer thought that she was beyond his reach. He was a Houtian middle-stage warrior now. He had made a huge progress, and had come close to the goal set by her. The goal was that he would have to reach the Xian level before turning 30. How dare you look at me with this kind of an expression? You must be careful, or I'll gouge your eyes out. The demon witch felt the intent look that Shi Mu was casting her. Therefore, she turned around and warned him with a cold face. You said the same words the last time as well. But, I've got this propitious chance to see you again, and that too with great difficulty. So, I'll still be beholding you for the rest of my life even if you dig out my eyes. Shi Mu struggled hard to sit up by propping himself against the tree. His face creased into a soft smile as he spoke these words. However, this action affected the wounds on his body. Fresh blood started to bubble up from his wounds. A huge amount of blood gurgled out of his mouth as well. You, the face of that beautiful girl revealed a trace of hesitation as she heard these words. She knitted her delicate eyebrows, and sized him up one more time. It seems that you've forgotten me. My name is Shi Mu. I made a vow to marry you in the woods outside the Feng city of the Dachi kingdom. Shi Mu smiled even though blood continued to stream down his body. The demon witch's tender body trembled, and her facial expressions changed. It's you. That's right. It seems that the fairy-like maiden hasn't forgotten me. The words that you had said that day have been constantly ringing in my ears. Shi Mu's complexion loosened, and his eyes glinted with eagerness as he said. So, have you joined any sect? The beautiful maiden's red lips moved. She seemed to be a little surprised. Shi Mu is now an official disciple of the Black Demon sect. My cultivation isn't that high, but I've reached the middle stage of the Houtian level. I'm not far from reaching the Houtian advanced stage. Moreover, I've recently found that I possess a magician's skills as well. I'm performing pretty well in magic arts. So, I'll reach the Xian level before I hit 30. Then, I'll set out for the Wolong Mountain to find you, and will propose marriage to you. You know that I never go back on a promise. Shi Mu's complexion had become deathly pale due to excessive bleeding. However, he spoke in a blissful manner. The demon witch was speechless. Her beautiful eyes were stretched wide open, and her small mouth was open in shock. Shi Mu continued to observe the mesmerizing face of this beautiful woman. He couldn't move his eyes from her face even for a second. The demon witch's cheeks became red with embarrassment as she noticed his gaze. She became nervous and looked away. Who's listening to your nonsense? Her bewildered and embarrassed facial expression added irresistible loveliness to her beauty. Shi Mu smiled as he noticed her bashful expression. He struggled to get on his feet, but failed. He staggered and fell down once again. His body was about to touch the ground when a cluster of clouds appeared and cradled his body. Are you all right? Suddenly, a person's shadow flashed, and the demon witch appeared to his side. Shi Mu asked subconsciously, "Are you worried about me?" I'm so glad." Coughs, a fit of uncontrollable coughing came over him before he could finish his words. It was accompanied with gushes of blood from his mouth. Shut your mouth, and close your eyes. You're not allowed to look at me. The demon witch's tone changed, she said in a cold voice. Shi Mu smiled as he heard these words. But, he obeyed her and closed his eyes. An icy cold yet pleasantly warm hand pressed on his chest. Then, a wisp of equally cold real qi entered and circulated within his body. After that, it slowly seeped into his veins. Shi Mu's complexion looked relaxed. The gnawing pain in his body was also reduced to a great extent. You've taken a powerful punch from Zhong Yuan. So, your bones and muscles have received a severe jolt. This jolt has crushed your entire body. It won't be easy to completely restore them. The demon witch retracted her palm. Then, she spoke in a low voice. Is there any way to cure my injuries? Shi Mu opened his eyes. He remained silent for a while, and then asked. There's a way. But, it'll be extremely painful. You might even lose your life if your willpower gives way anytime through this process. In fact, I'm not sure if your injuries will be completely cured after the treatment or not, she spoke with twinkling eyes. Don't worry. I'll make it. I have to reach the Xiantian level at any cost, and then I'll marry. The demon witch's complexion reddened as she heard this. Her glittering eyes glared at him fiercely. Shi Mu returned a wry smile, and didn't speak any further on the subject. Let's put aside this healing matter for a while. The Xiantian barbarian that you've just frozen, is he really dead? It would be good to wipe him out first. I just noticed a trace of blue light glowing on his body. Shi Mu's vision moved and fell on the ice ball behind her. He then spoke up in order to remind her. What? The girl's complexion changed, and she hastily turned around. Suddenly, a dazzling blue light emerged from the black-robed barbarian's shoulders inside the huge crystal ball. Then, a blue shadow of a tiger's face appeared in front of his body. It opened its mouth, and issued a muffled roar. A circle of blue ripples appeared and proliferated in all directions. Suddenly, the ice ball trembled, and numerous cracks appeared over its surface. Then, the ice ball crumbled into several pieces with a loud rumble. The black-robed man fell on the ground like a piece of paper. He cast a fearful glance at the demon witch. Then, he stretched his arms like a mighty black eagle, and fled at a lightning speed. The girl's body was set into motion. The ice ruler in her hand emanated a bright light, and it started to pursue the barbarian man. However, the tiger shadow over the man's shoulder opened its mouth, and spouted a blue beam of light. That light beam flew towards the girl at an incredible speed. The girl's complexion changed. She wielded her jade ruler once again. Then, a white light flashed and condensed into an ice wall before her body to shield her from the blow. Kaka, a crackling sound was heard. The ice wall fell apart, the blue beam of light also disappeared from the sight. However, the black-robed man's figure had also disappeared without a trace. The delicate eyebrows of the demon witch furrowed. But, she didn't try to pursue him again. Chapter 118, Healing in the Cave. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Was that the secret totem technique of the barbarian race? It was quite powerful, so much so that it crushed the huge ice ball you had formed. Shi Mu looked at the demon witch. He then sighed and spoke in a sulking tone. It was my fault. I hadn't expected that Zhong Yuan would integrate the soul of a thunderbolt tiger into his body. She stomped her foot and replied. There was a look of reluctance on her face. The luck was on his side today. So, he could escape from your hands. Don't let this bother you. If you really care about this, then I'll take care of him once I step into the Xiantian realm. Shi Mu blinked his eyes and spoke with a smile. I wonder if you're ignorant, or just too full of yourself. Do you really think that it would be easy to advance to the Xiantian realm? You must know that Zhong Yuan the barbarian that we just confronted is considered to be one of the most formidable Xiantian warriors. You won't be a match for him, even if you successfully forge ahead with your goal, and enter the Xiantian realm. so, don't throw away your precious life in vain, the beautiful maiden said with a smile. She seemed to be pleased and amused at the same time. Moreover, she found herself struck by a feeling of warmth in her heart. Even her tone had softened now. Shi Mu will definitely do as I say, Shi Mu spoke up in an earnest tone. Humph! A man who can't even stand up on his feet dares to talk like this. Now, I'm sure that you're an absolute fool, the demon witch snorted and waved her jade ruler. The cluster of white clouds cradled Shi Mu and the girl surnamed Qi. Then, it rose and got suspended in the air. It seemed ready to depart. Wait a moment. Sister K is still outside. She was also injured by that Xian Tian warrior Zhong Yuan. I wonder what happened to her. Can we take her with us? Suddenly, Shi Mu remembered something. He then said promptly. K, the demon witch wrinkled her delicate eyebrows. She looked at Shi Mu with a dubious look in her eyes. There's nothing special between us. We've been assigned to the same stronghold. She's a wood-style magician of the wonderful sound sect. She has helped me several times. Shi Mu's heart leapt into his throat. Then, he hastily explained. Humph! You don't have to explain it to me. The girl has a defensive treasure with her, that resisted the major part of the attack. So, she didn't receive any fatal injury. In fact, she's awake now. A gleam of blush flashed across the charming face of the demon witch as she replied in a cold voice. Then, she turned her eyes in other direction. Shi Mu was startled. He turned his head with difficulty, and followed the demon witch's line of sight. He was surprised to see Kay staggering towards them. Her face looked pale. There were bloodstains on the corners of her mouth. She was pleasantly surprised to see that Shi Mu was all right. Brother Shi, it's good to see that you're all right. It's a great honor to see you here, Senior. Kay greeted Shi Mu and expressed her concern about him. Then, she bowed to the demon witch with veneration. A gleam of suspicion flashed across the demon witch's eyes as she looked at Kay. She waved her jade ruler, and a cluster of white clouds emerged under Kay's feet. The white clouds then lifted her up into the air. It's not safe here. Let's leave this place. I must find a safe place to heal you, the demon witch spoke in a low voice. Then, she floated upwards and sat beside Shi Mu. After that, her lily-white delicate hands rose once again. Then, the three clusters of clouds started to fly towards the distant place at an extremely fast speed. The cluster of clouds continued to fly for more than an hour at an incredibly fast speed. They finally landed on a huge mountain peak. Then, the demon witch took them inside a cave. After that, she began to heal the girl surnamed Qi. That girl had received much lighter injuries than Shi Mu. The demon witch fed her a pill. Then, she pushed her abdomen to invigorate the circulation of blood. This worked and the girl's breathing stabilized. However, her eyes were still closed, she didn't show the slightest sign of regaining consciousness. Shi Mu lay on the ground, and watched the demon witch bustling around in front of him. There was a trace of a soft smile on his lips. His external injuries had already been cured by the demon witch before they had arrived here. So, he wasn't bleeding now. Kay sat on a side with closed eyes. A green beam of light was twinkling on the surface of her body. She seemed to be healing her injuries on her own. The demon witch stood up after a while, she seemed to have healed the girl's injuries. She then turned and walked over to Shi Mu's side. You've just gone through a fierce battle. You've also carried all of us here. This would have consumed a huge amount of your real qi. So, you also need to take rest. My injuries won't get worse if you take a short rest, Shi Mu said. He had noticed her pale and exhausted complexion. It doesn't matter. Healing your wounds won't consume too much of my strength, she replied in a low voice. She waved her hand gently. Another cluster of clouds lifted Shi Mu up into the air. A beam of red light flashed as a short dark red stick appeared in her hand. She stooped it down, and began to draw something on the ground. Her movement appeared exceptionally skilled. Then, a dark red charm character appeared on the ground with a flick of her wrist. A gleam of astonishment flashed across Shi Mu's eyes as he saw this. He had never thought that the demon witch could also draw a magic circle. The beautiful maiden seemed to be extremely proficient in drawing a magic circle. Moreover, her attainment was worth noticing. She finished drawing a complex magic circle within a mere quarter of an hour. Shi Mu was still swaying in the tide of amazement when the demon witch waved her hand. Suddenly, Shi Mu found himself sitting in the center of the magic circle. Then, a beam of bright red light fled from her hand, and submerged into the magic circle. Buzz! Buzz! The charm spell drawn on the ground got activated. It formed a red light beam that enveloped Shi Mu's body. Then, a stream of warmness was released from the red beam of light. It permeated inside Shi Mu's body. It rendered an inexplicable amount of comfort and warmth to him. The bones and muscles of your entire body have been badly crushed. So, I'll have to rebuild your broken bones by recombining them with your veins and arteries, the demon witch explained. She pulled out a red jade box, and opened it. There was a blood-red pill inside it. It was as big as a pigeon egg. A red light was gleaming on its surface. A faint image of a ferocious tiger could also be seen in the light. It emanated a strong wave of magic power. The black blood and soul pill, a surprised voice was heard from behind. Kay opened her eyes and saw the blood-red pill. She covered her mouth and spoke in astonishment. I never thought that a little girl like you could be so knowledgeable. That's right. This is the black blood and soul pill. The essence and soul of a blood-wind tiger are sealed inside it. You'll have to endure extreme pain, and accept the black blood vessels in your veins. This will rebuild your broken bones and muscles if you can do that. In addition, the massive amount of fire element chi stored inside the pill will also get stored within your body. This will benefit you a lot in your future cultivation. The demon witch shot a glance at Kay. Then, she explained to Shi Mu in an expressionless tone. Shi Mu's complexion changed as he gazed at the pill in the jade box. This pill had to be extremely precious if it was so wonderful. So, the demon witch wasn't devoid of feelings for Shi Mu if she really wanted to use it on him. Shi Mu felt extremely cheerful as this thought crossed his mind. He took a long and deep breath and spoke, "You don't need to worry. I can endure it, no matter how painful it is." The demon witch burst into a giggle as she heard his words. The pleasant sound of her giggle was like a lotus flower that had blossomed on a glacier. Shi Mu seemed to be lost in a dream, as if her melodious giggle had cast a spell of dizziness on him. Kay had realized by now that there was something unusual between Shi Mu and this beautiful maiden. She was left stupefied for a moment. A trace of perplexed look appeared on her face. The 9 reincarnations spell drawn on the ground can reduce your pain to an extent. The smile stayed on the demon witch's face for a fleeting moment. She then resumed her cold and indifferent expression. After that, she moved and stepped out of the circle. Shi Mu took a deep breath and nodded. The blood-red pill flew out from the jade case, and made its way inside Shi Mu's mouth as the demon witch waved her hand. Shi Mu's complexion changed as soon as the pill entered his mouth. The pill felt like a piece of burning red charcoal had been put in his mouth. He almost slipped into unconsciousness for a moment. He then opened his eyes and slightly raised his head. After that, he swallowed down the pill. He felt as if a group of blazing fireball had floated down his throat and landed in his lower abdomen. A hot wave of flame spread throughout his body. Shi Mu's complexion became deathly pale out of severe pain. Soybean-sized beads of sweat started to slide down his forehead. Blue veins protruded out of his skin. However, he clenched his teeth, and refrained from groaning out in pain. The demon witch threw a glance at him. Then, she started to chant a strange incantation in a clear voice. She also continued to wave her hands every now and then. The 9 reincarnations spell started to exude a dazzling red light. This red light twined around Shi Mu's body like a band of silk. It wasn't very effective, but it forcefully suppressed the burning pain within his body. Shi Mu's body quivered as the pill turned into a ball of burning flames in his abdomen. One could see a group of bright red flames in his lower abdomen with naked eye. The burning pain had grown much fiercer, and it rapidly spread to every part of his body. He felt as if every inch of his flesh was burning. At the same time, he felt as if his entire body was being cut with countless sharp knives. It was an extremely torturous process. An ordinary person would wish for immediate death rather than going through this process. Stabilize your mind. Don't let yourself loose. Otherwise, it'll ruin my previous efforts. The voice of the demon witch resounded in Shi Mu's ears. Shi Mu tried hard to suppress his pain. He started to practice the art of accumulating spirit power in order to adjust his mind and control the violent fluctuation of his spirit power. The severe burning pain continued to rush to his mind. But, his mind gradually regained its steadiness under the influence of the art of accumulating spirit power. Suddenly, the stream of scorching heat wave started to spread from his abdomen. It passed through his veins and arteries, and started to circulate all over his body. He could feel his fractured bones getting repaired as the heat wave passed through every part of his body. This sensation filled Shi Mu's heart with a joyous feeling. He began to practice the art of accumulating spirit power more carefully. The demon witch's eyebrows snapped into a frown, and a gleam of astonished look streaked across her beautiful eyes. She started to mumble something, and pointed her finger at Shi Mu. The demon witch was relieved to see Shi Mu's improved condition. Her eyes twinkled as she gazed at the cocoon-like red light wrapped around Shi Mu's body. She seemed to be lost in thoughts. Time passed by really fast. The sky turned bright before any one of them could notice. The demon witch sat motionless on the ground with crossed legs. She was staring at the blood-red cocoon standing upright in the magic circle. The girl surnamed Chi had also regained her consciousness. She and Kay stood next to each other. The 9 reincarnations spell was still active. It was emitting a buzzing sound along with a faint red light from its surface. Suddenly, the demon witch's vision moved and ran over the cocoon. She nodded to herself, and resumed to chant an incantation in a low voice. The red light gradually dissipated from the surface of the charm spell. However, the faint red light on the blood-red cocoon hadn't been diminished. "Senior, how is Brother Shi now?" Kay asked hesitatingly. "His bones and veins have been rebuilt. It happened only because he went through such an extreme suffering. But, he still needs a couple of days to rest and fully recuperate." The demon witch's eyes turned towards Kay. Then, she spoke in a low voice. Kay heaved a sigh of relief as she heard this. Chapter 119, The Fierce Inflammation Arrow. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. "That's all I can do for him. I'm afraid I can't stay here for long. I'll have to leave immediately. So, I'm leaving him to you girls." The demon witch stood up and said. "Yes," the girl surnamed Chi complied with her respectfully. However, Kay looked startled. The stronghold you people were assigned to no longer exist. It was wiped off by the barbarians. So, there's no need to go back. This map can help you understand the terrain of this area. There's a stronghold at a distance of 50 miles from this mountain. Wait until he fully recovers. Then, you can report to that stronghold." The demon witch pondered for a moment. Then, she fished out a jade slip from her bosom and passed it over to them. The 2 girls nodded hastily. The girl surnamed Chi put out her hand. She was about to take the slip when the demon witch turned her stretched hand, and handed over the jade slip to Kay. Her complexion turned solemn as she spoke. "Lil Xian, Lan Yun had accepted you as her apprentice in her lifetime. So, you can return to our Tianyin sect with me. Forget about alliance. The old guys of the Union won't dare to say anything to you if you come with me." "Thank you, Senior. But, I'm a disciple of the Tianyin sect. So, I can't disobey our sect's order. It would be more appropriate if I stay here at this critical time. Moreover, my master once said that it would be very difficult for a person to break through the bottleneck if they don't experience the danger of real swords and spears." There was a trace of sorrow in the girl's eyes. She shook her head, and spoke in a determined tone. "Then, take good care of yourself. I may not be able to appear again to pull you out of danger." The demon witch let out a soft sigh as she heard her resolute voice. She didn't say anything further. She then shifted her gaze, and looked at the blood-red cocoon. She hesitated for a moment, and let out another soft sigh. After that, a layer of white clouds emerged under her feet and carried her out of the cave. It then sped towards the distance, and quickly disappeared from their sight. Kay's eyes revealed a perplexed look as she gazed at the receding figure of the demon witch. Suddenly, she was struck by mixed feelings. She felt envy and at a loss at the same time. 2 days later, Shi Mu sat cross-legged inside the cave. His eyes were closed, he seemed to be adjusting his breathing. Not a single bruise could be seen on his body. Moreover, his crushed bones, muscles and veins had been reinstated to normal health. His appearance hadn't changed. However, the color of his skin had deepened. Kay and the girl surnamed Chi sat on one side, they were constantly watching him. Shi Mu was practicing the art of breeding heavenly elephants. He could feel his real chi surging inside his body like tidal waves. The continuous expansion of his ki strength was so forceful that his clothes fluttered every now and then. In addition, a feeble and faint whirlwind had formed, and had started to circle around his body. He exhaled a long breath after a while, and opened his eyes. His face revealed a contented and delighted expression. He had finally absorbed the heavenly energy stored in the black blood and soul pill. Therefore, his injuries had been fully restored. Moreover, his real chi had become stronger than before. He was just a step away from entering the 5th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants at present. However, he felt a sense of loss and emptiness since the beautiful maiden was no longer around him. He shook his head and stood up. He then clasped his hands against his chest as he looked towards Kay and the girl surnamed Chi. He then spoke respectfully, "Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to you two for looking after me. I've fully recuperated now. So, let's get out of here." The 2 girls didn't seem to have any objection. The 3 of them finally left the cave. They descended the mountain, and started to advance in a particular direction. 1 month later, somewhere in the forest on the border of the Fu prefecture, Shi Mu wielded the black blade, and stared at a barbarian who stood in front of him. The barbarian was almost as tall as Shi Mu. He had a thin physique, and a short stature. He looked like an ordinary human man. A totem of a blue wolf was carved on his exposed chest. The image of the wolf looked as if it was howling towards the sky. The barbarian seemed to be a totem warrior. Another totem warrior stood behind the short barbarian. He wore a pair of golden rings in his ears. The 2 barbarians had formed a position which would enable them to launch a converging attack. Shi Mu had slipped into a barbarian camp on the border of Fu Prefecture 12 hours ago. He was assigned to infiltrate and investigate the enemy's camp. He had carried out his mission successfully. But, he hadn't expected that he would bump into these 2 totem warriors on his way back from their camp. This place was very close to their camp. So, the longer Shi Mu was delayed by these 2 enemies, the more perilous his situation would become. A stern look flashed across Shi Mu's eyes. Suddenly, his body moved and flashed several feet away. He stopped in front of the short barbarian. Then, a black light sprang from his shoulder. Shua! The black blade trembled in air, and released 13 blade shadows. The shadows cascaded down towards his enemy with a bone-chilling wind. Growl! The sound of a wolf's howling was heard. Suddenly, a blue gleam flashed on the chest of the short barbarian. Then, his arms transformed into 2 furry wolf claws. A glittering green light emerged on his incisive fingernails. There was a fierce look in his eyes. He started to wave his wolf claws in front of his body at quick pace. This rapid movement produced interwoven blue claw shadows that collided with the approaching black blade shadows. A burst of clanking sound was heard. The black blade shadows and the blue claw shadows collided with each other and dispersed. But then, dozens of blue claw shadows darted toward Shi Mu. A gust of forceful fist wind pushed and toppled Shi Mu from behind at the same time. Shi Mu's eyes flashed with a trace of cold look in them. He didn't step back. Instead, he rushed forward with the black blade in his hand. He simultaneously infused his magic power in his blade. The charm characters carved on the surface of the blade lit up. Suddenly, a fire fluttered out of the blade's surface. It struck the approaching blue shadows like a thunderbolt. Bang! An explosive sound was heard. The bright red flame ruptured, and the scorching hot air wave swept away the blue shadows. The short barbarian was caught off guard. He was rolled up by the scorching hot air wave, and was thrown upside down in the air. He was still mid-air when he saw Shi Mu spouting a small cluster of white clouds. These white clouds then darted towards him at an alarming speed. His complexion became pale as he saw this. His heart was frozen with overwhelming fear. Shi Mu had just displayed the Qi explosion technique. Then, he turned around and pounded his translucent sparkling white fist forward. It struck a black ox's hoof with a lightning speed. The ox hoof was almost as big as a human's head. It had already arrived close to him. Clang! A metal clanging sound was heard. Shi Mu felt as if he had been knocked against a gigantic 500 kilograms wild ox. The gigantic inhuman strength made his chest stuffy. His body got pushed several steps backwards. The tall barbarian with golden earrings had launched this sneak attack. However, he was also tossed back into the air by the impact of this huge collision. He was still mid-air when he heard a dull thumping sound from behind. The short barbarian had tried to resist the Qi explosion technique with his arms. But, his arms had blown into pieces, and his chest had been mutilated by Shi Mu's powerful attack. He then fell heavily to the ground. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of him. It was Shi Mu. A blood-curdling screech resounded. Then, a spurt of fresh blood was shot towards the sky. The short barbarian's head was cut off by the black blade. Shi Mu heard a sound of footsteps from behind him. They seemed to be moving away at a rapid pace. He turned around to realize that the other barbarian was fleeing towards the forest. The tall barbarian had noticed that the situation had become unfavorable for him. So, he had decided to flee into the forest. He had covered several feet of distance in a fleeting moment. Shi Mu smiled, and flicked his right hand. Suddenly, his black blade turned into a blazing fire, and dashed towards the tall barbarian at an incredible speed. The tall barbarian had hardly heaved a sigh of relief when he heard a strange sound. He felt a sharp burning pain in his chest before he could react. He saw the pointed edge of a red blade protrude from his chest. Shi Mu's blade had pierced through his chest from behind. Puff! A whiff of raging flames welled up from his chest. They then consumed his entire body, and his body started to burn. The tall barbarian had turned into a scorched gravel before he could understand anything. Shi Mu had already picked up his blade, and had streaked away by now. Then, he disappeared into the dense forest. A few months later, on the border of the Rui prefecture, Shi Mu sat cross-legged with closed eyes. He was in a dilapidated house which was surrounded by the ruins of a village. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm. He seemed to be in the middle of restoring his physical strength. A purple bow lay beside his body. It seemed to be made up of steel. Suddenly, he heard a hubbub of noises coming from a distance. He opened his eyes wide, and sprang up like a vigilant cat. He grabbed the purple steel bow, and silently left the house. He then started to move stealthily towards the east. He crouched down on a half-burnt roof after a moment, and gazed into the distance, towards the source of the noise. He saw around 200 barbarian soldiers at a distance of several hundred meters. They were engaged in a fierce battle with a human army that consisted of the same number of people. The earth was shaking because of their loud cries and roars. The weapons of the human army were far better than their enemies. However, their enemies were much taller and stronger than them. Therefore, they seemed to be at a huge disadvantage. However, the humans still seemed to be calm and composed. They continued to fight with their opponents as they advanced towards the village. It seemed that they wanted to use the village as their cover. The barbarian soldiers were trying their best to fail their attempts. They continued to swoop down on the humans vigorously. Therefore, the situation had become extremely fierce. Both the sides were losing their soldiers. However, the humans were losing 3 or 4 soldiers against a single barbarian warrior. The battle was becoming one-sided, and it seemed to be inclining towards the barbarians. Shi Mu shifted his vision, and looked in the center of the crowd. He saw a military officer of the Dachi kingdom. The man wore full body armor. He held a long silver spear, he was waving it in all directions. He was in confrontation with a totem warrior who was wielding a pair of giant axes. Shi Mu could faintly hear the sounds of the clashing of metals. Shi Mu knew that the military officer must quickly kill the totem warrior since he seemed to be the leader of the barbarians. The barbarians would certainly fall apart once their leader was slaughtered. Otherwise, the entire human army would eventually be annihilated. However, the leaders of both the armies seemed to be equally strong. So, it didn't seem like their battle would be getting over soon. Shi Mu didn't know why, but he had an indistinct feeling. The military officer seemed to be familiar to him. But, Shi Mu couldn't see his face since it was covered with a helmet. Shi Mu had already accomplished the mission that had been assigned to him. So, he was officially on a break. However, he couldn't sit back and watch his kin being slaughtered by the barbarians. He observed his surroundings. He then got down from the roof, and started to walk towards the battlefield. He reached a ditch near the battlefield after some time. The human army had lost more than 20 soldiers in this short span of time. The humans were compelled to fight back more cautiously due to the violent attacks of the barbarian soldiers. Moreover, they had given up the thought of withdrawing. A layer of pale golden gleam emerged in Shi Mu's eyes. He drew out a special-looking arrow from his back. The arrowhead was fiery red in color. A tiny charm spell could be seen on its surface. It seemed to be a magic weapon. This arrow was called the Fierce Inflammation Arrow. Shi Mu had superimposed 3 layers of the Fierce Inflammation charm magic on its arrowhead. Shi Mu had wanted to overlay more layers on the arrowhead. But, it was extremely difficult to draw formulas on the arrowhead since it was very small. Therefore, Shi Mu hadn't been able to superimpose more than 3 layers on its surface. It could be said that drawing a magic charm on the arrowhead was even harder than drawing 8 or 9 charm characters on the Moonlight Sea Urchin daggers. The might of this arrow was ordinary. It was merely 1/10 of the strength of the Moonlight Sea Urchin dagger. However, the might of these arrows' instantaneous explosion was quite frightful once they had penetrated into the enemy's body. Shi Mu had exerted a huge mental effort to create 10 such arrows when he had received the purple steel arrow. But, the rest of the arrows in his arrow bag were ordinary arrows without any magical power. Shi Mu wanted to test the might of this arrow. So, he placed the arrow on the bow. Then, he accumulated his strength to launch a powerful shot. Chapter 120, A Friendly Match. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Both the sides were blazing with a desire to kill each other, so much so that their eyes were bloodshot. No one noticed as a deadly arrow was aimed at its target from somewhere. Whiz, an arrow whistled, and flashed past at a lightning speed like a black line. A strange sound resounded. It caught the attention of both the totem warrior and the military officer. The two of them were locked in a fierce battle at this moment. The totem warrior saw a dark shadow moving towards him at a rapid pace. The shadow had arrived close to him before he could respond. So, it was impossible to dodge it. Puff! The arrow flashed and submerged into his chest. There was a sudden illumination of fire. Then, the arrow exploded with a loud rumbling sound. A short yet pitiful bellow of the totem warrior was heard. An intense energy of fire element exploded as the arrow sunk into his chest. A huge hole had been formed. It was almost as big as a human head. He crashed down heavily on the ground. Blood spurted out from his wound like a stream, and showered on the military officer's face. The officer was dumbfounded. So, he couldn't avoid this fountain of blood in time. Whiz! 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 The whistling sound of arrows resounded one after another. A barbarian soldier had just knocked down the weapon of a human soldier. His stone sledgehammer was still in the air when a shadow pierced through his throat. Another barbarian soldier on the edge of the battlefield was flinging his bone spear in a crazy manner. He had just raised his hand when he was shot in his forehead by another arrow. He fell down heavily to the ground. Similar incidents occurred at various other places on the battlefield. Another barbarian soldier fell dead on the ground with a whistling arrow. However, the loud explosion that had occurred a moment ago wasn't heard again. The military officer also responded, and moved into action. He realized that the hidden archer was on their side. This lifted his spirits. He thundered loudly as he turned around and rushed into the barbarian army. Ordinary barbarian soldiers were no match for him. His long silver spear swayed around in a flexible manner like a poisonous snake. It looked extensible like a lamp's pith. Each of its shot injured a barbarian soldier. Other human soldiers were also encouraged by the bravery of the mysterious archer and their commander. They became excited, and began to launch counterattacks. The 200 soldiers of the barbarian army were wiped off within a couple of minutes. Then, the human soldiers started to clean up the battlefield. The military officer started to walk in the direction of Shi Mu's hideout. He shouted loudly, "Thank you so much for your help, brave warrior. I request you to come out and show yourself." Shi Mu glanced at his half-empty arrow pouch. He then walked out of the ditch with the purple steel bow in his hand. "Shi Mu!" The military officer cried out in amazement. He was so startled that he became motionless. Shi Mu was also startled. The military officer noticed a perplexed expression on Shi Mu's face. Suddenly, his eyes flashed as a thought crossed his mind. He hastily took off his mask and revealed his face. "Wang Tianhao." Shi Mu's eyes exhibited a hint of astonishment as he gazed at the fair and clear complexion of the youth. Have you really become a disciple of the Black Demon sect?" Wang Tianhao exclaimed as he saw the emblem of red flames on Shi Mu's cuff. The Black Demon sect was considered a famous sect of the Yan Kingdom. In fact, it was as famed as the three big sects of the Dachi Kingdom. It had far surpassed the Kaiyuan martial arts school. Shi Mu smiled. However, he didn't reply. His journey had been extremely complicated and strange. He couldn't explain it in a couple of sentences. Moreover, there were many soldiers around. He didn't wish to share anything in front of them. Haha! I had never thought that Brother Shi would run to the Yan Kingdom. The Wu and Jin families have separately offered a reward of 500,000 silvers to find you. They wouldn't be able to sleep at night, if they knew that you've joined a sect. Wang Tianhao didn't dig into the details. He changed the topic of discussion. He laughed as he spoke. Shi Mu was moved. He didn't know anything about this matter. But, he had anticipated the actions the Wu and the Jin families might take. This matter is too complicated to talk about. But, Brother Wang, how did you become a high-ranking military officer of the Dachi Kingdom? Shi Mu pointed at his armor and asked. I joined the Kaiyuan martial arts school shortly after you left the Feng City. Our school sent new disciples to join the Dachi Kingdom's armed forces when the barbarians mounted a large-scale invasion on the kingdom. It was similar to a test for the new disciples. You're also here, this means that you've also been sent by your sect, Wang Tianhao replied in a calm manner. Yes, that's right. Shi Mu nodded. Shi Mu, it was detected back then, that you possessed the wasted bloodline of the stone monkey. It turns out that it was a blessing in disguise, as you have joined a sect now. You must know that the Black Demon sect is considered as one of the 7 big sects of the 3 kingdoms. Your sect is famous for possessing a large collection of wonderful secret arts. You might have already reached the primary stage of the Hotian realm. Wang Tianhao's eyes shined as he looked at Shi Mu. Hotian primary stage? Shi Mu rubbed his nose, he didn't speak anything. His facial expressions revealed a non-committal look. It would be great if the 2 of us have a match. What do you think? I always wanted to have a match with a disciple of a renowned sect. But, I never got any chance. Wang Tianhao swung his silver spear across his face and said. He was looking at Shi Mu fervently. Shi Mu was dumbstruck as he heard these words. Shi Mu had seen Wang Tianhao fighting with the barbarian soldiers. He knew that he wasn't weak. However, his strength couldn't be placed on par with Shi Mu's. It's just a friendly match to learn something from each other. I promise to offer you 100,000 silvers regardless of the outcome. What do you say? Wang Tianhao noticed that Shi Mu was reluctant to fight as he didn't give any reply. So, he quickly explained. If Brother Wang loses, then he'll have to give 2 low-grade spirit stones apart from the money. Then, I might think about it, Shi Mu blinked and said with a smile. Fine, that's settled then. Wang Tianhao was delighted. Shi Mu nodded. He placed his purple steel bow to one side. He then ritually cupped his hands towards Wang Tianhao. After that, he took a posture. The surrounding soldiers who were cleaning up the battlefield stopped working, and circled around the 2 people in small groups. Shi Mu and Wang Tianhao stood in the center of a huge circle. The circle was almost 100 feet in radius. The soldiers had barely survived a fierce battle. So, they held a sense of gratitude towards Shi Mu, a mysterious archer who had helped them with his wondrous arrows. They had also noticed that their team commander was familiar with him. Moreover, he was about to begin a friendly match with the archer. So, they couldn't help but cheer in exhilaration. There was nothing more entertaining for martial artists than witnessing 2 experts compete. This was an extremely rare opportunity. Wang Tianhao was bubbling with excitement. He laughed heartily. Then, he waved his silver spear. The sharp tip of the upper half of the spear gleamed, and became fuzzy. Puff! 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 12 dark red flames appeared in front of him. He had mastered the latter half of the blazing spear art in the past 2 years. He had probably reached the consummate stage of this art as the fire appeared more intense than before. Moreover, he could release 12 fireballs in one breath. Wang Tianhao grasped his spear with both hands and shook it. The point of the spear drew a silver circle in the air. The 12 flames seemed to have received a mysterious traction force. They took a turn in the air, and got absorbed into the circle. Bang! The silver circle was shrouded by the roaring flames in a flash. Then, Wang Tianhao struck his spear out. A fire dragon leapt from the center of the circle, and darted towards Shi Mu's chest. A burst of scorching heat wave had spread in all directions even though the spear hadn't even arrived. This made everyone gasp for breath. Shi Mu's expressions changed. He moved his right hand, and the sparkling white light enveloped his fist as it transformed into a fist shadow. Then, he thrust his fist towards Wang Tianhao with a loud rumble. Boom! A loud rumble filled the air. It seemed as if a huge rock had pounded on the fire. A dazzling light radiated in all directions with a spark. Shi Mu's stone-breaking fist had turned out to be better than his opponent's attack. The radiance of the fire dragon dimmed. This revealed the sharp tip of the silver spear. It was still shrouded by the dim radiance of the fire dragon. Suddenly, a bone-cracking sound was heard as Shi Mu's arms swelled up. They looked as muscular as a barbarian's arms. Then, a loud shout was heard. His sparkling and translucent fist struck the fire dragon on its head. It caused a loud sound. It was similar to a metal clanging sound. The fire dissipated, and the tip of the silver spear became fully visible. Wang Tianhao was shaken up by the gigantic force that passed through his spear's tip. He couldn't help but draw a few steps backwards. A gleam of surprised look flashed in his eyes. However, Shi Mu still stood at the same place. He withdrew his fist as if nothing had happened. Wang Tianhao steadied his body and stood firm. He looked at Shi Mu with a dignified expression on his face. He then adjusted his hands, and held his spear in a strange posture. Shi Mu saw a row of fiery red magical characters at the back of his silver spear. He was surprised to see that the spear was also a magic weapon. The Black Demon sect lives up to its reputation. Brother Shi, if you repel my dragon tail spear's attack, then I'll accept my defeat willingly, Wang Tianhao spoke in a tone that dripped of self-confidence. The dragon tail spear was a special martial art that was used to amplify the strength of one's bloodline power. Wang Tianhao had chosen it as an optional course when he had joined the Blood Hall of the Kaiyuan Martial Arts School. Only those who possessed the corresponding bloodline could practice this art. Suddenly, the flame of Wang Tianhao's spear increased and intensified. The spear seemed to be swaying and twisting in the fire like a snake. The hot air wave also seemed to be more intense than before. Wang Tianhao dragged his spear with its tip trailing on the ground. He then scuttled a few steps, and twisted his waist to strengthen the force. Suddenly, the spear's point sprang from the ground. A dozen or more fire snakes fled from the spear's tip, and leapt towards Shi Mu at an incredible speed. Shi Mu's expressions remained unchanged. His right hand moved towards his back, and a black light flashed out of thin air. Then, his black blade trembled and emitted 13 black blade shadows at one breath. The shadows fled and collided with the group of fire snakes. Bang! 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 A series of explosions resounded. The 13 blade shadows had successfully repelled the attack of fire snakes. However, the blade shadows were also rooted and dispersed. Wang Tianhao's eyes beamed with a contented and delighted expression. He rotated where he stood, and the sturdy tail of his spear transformed into a red snake's tail. He then whipped it fiercely at Shi Mu. Fire Dragon Swaying Tail! Wang Tianhao shouted. Shi Mu's eyes flashed with an astonished expression. He promptly activated his magic power. The charm spell engraved on his black blade dazzled with bright red light. Then, a raging flame emerged on the surface of his blade. It pounded forcefully at the snake's tail like a long-hilted blazing blade. Bang! A thunderous sound was heard. A huge fire burst out on the snake's tail. The tyrannical force of the blast made it difficult for Wang Tianhao to hold his spear. Consequently, his spear was shaken up and sent flying in the air. It then fell down and submerged into the ground several meters away. Wang Tianhao stared at the tranquil expression on Shi Mu's face. His lips moved slightly, but he couldn't speak anything. Moreover, most of the surrounding soldiers had an expression of amazement on their faces. Soldiers dealing with a life-and-death situation on a regular basis worshipped strong warriors more than ordinary people did. A soldier walked a few steps forward. He respectfully handed over 20 steel arrows to Shi Mu. These arrows were shot by him a short while ago. However, Shi Mu didn't express any gratitude to him. He took them and slipped them in his arrow pouch. He then picked up his purple steel bow, turned around and left the place with long strides. Brother Wang, you can drop the things that you promised in the nearby stronghold. I'll collect them someday. I still have a mission to carry out. So, I can't linger around any longer, Shi Mu's voice resounded from far away. I'll keep my word. Wang Tianhao gazed at Shi Mu's receding figure. He then sighed and replied in a loud voice.